Hello and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and the Fool.
Here with Romney.
Yeah.
And, hope you enjoy it again. Well, do I? Oh, not this one.
Don't start, you're getting existential.
Well, no, it's more, do I actually care if anyone enjoys this? I would like it if they enjoy it, but I don't know if I hope they enjoy it.
I'll enjoy it. I love the sound of my own voice.
Yeah. I was watching, what are they called? Mahler's thing, EFAP. They were criticizing, what's his name, Hassan Piker, for doing basically what I'm doing right now. A lot of pausing and trying to catch up in his voice. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that I do that quite a bit, especially now. And I think it's probably related to vocal strain to a degree. And given that he streams like 8 hours a day.
I wonder about those people who just stream 8 hours a day. Like, how does their brain not know?
So you know how you were telling me that you thought my voice was weak or something? Because I got it sore just from talking a bunch.
Yeah.
That's a very common injury for certain professions, teachers, singers, radio show hosts. Mm. And I was looking at the amount of hours radio show hosts, for example, talk a day. It's something like 6 hours straight. Mm. That's less than I do. I was calculating my own, and mine was closer to 6 to 11 hours. So
Daddy boy.
Like, this was when I was using the voice controls especially. Yeah. So I think you just underestimated how much I talk.
Could be.
But it's for some reason I find that I have troubles continuing my sentence now. Like, it's not a pain thing, it's just, maybe it's because I'm not talking most of the time, so I'm not used to talking now. But you definitely, when your voice is tired, it seems like the brain-voice connection takes longer. I don't know.
My mouth just gets super clammy after talking for a long time. It's like you always want to drink, but it's the equivalent of having sweaty hands, but just inside your mouth. It's really weird.
I know what you mean by wanting to drink. I'm not sure about the
it's like you want to drink to like clean everything up, but after you do, it doesn't fix it, is the thing.
Well, I think what happened was, because it was like, I don't know, over a year ago now, I was thinking, man, I'm getting thirsty. I walk for 2 kilometers and I'm just thirsty, so I had to start bringing a water bottle with me. I was like, man, I must be sick or something, but or maybe just hiking really dehydrates me for some reason. I don't know what's going on, but I think that probably was the start of noticing that there was something wrong. And it's because you shouldn't just breathing slightly harder for 2 kilometers of walking, whatever that is, half an hour, shouldn't make you dehydrate. So, and when I would drink, nothing would happen. It was I'd drink and I still feel a dry throat, so maybe throat isn't dry.
I noticed that a lot when we were in the basement, have parties.
Oh yeah.
Get down there, and when you're in that basement for a long time, it's infused with cigarette smoke.
Yeah, you're getting really bad second or third hand.
Yeah, so it started feeling really thirsty and start getting headaches, and drinking would help a little bit, only while you're drinking the water, and then go back to being pretty bad.
Also, if you're tired, you'll feel dehydrated and talking, and you're drinking. You don't drink, but yeah. Alcohol will definitely make you feel dehydrated. And so will coffee and hot chocolate and
I often
grapes.
Often found that a lot of people at the parties would stay overnight, and I always leave because, one, I had the option to leave, and two, the one time I did stay, when I woke up, I was dying, felt a little mummified.
There's very few people's houses that waking up in them has felt good. Not just party-wise, I mean at all. For some reason, other people's air just kind of throws you
probably
off.
Also you've been staying up super duper late if you're crashing out of buddies.
But I'm thinking when we go to our grandma's, I would feel I'd feel bad in the morning. Although
old people air is different.
Yeah. Oh no, Oppo's was fine. I think it's because we're by hydroponics though.
Maybe. I never really liked it.
I was fine with it. Grandma's though I had troubles with, and Omi's, but
Omi's was the one where she had that horrible mattress, which didn't help at all.
Yeah, my grandparents, you can always tell anything that's come from their house. Like the mail, it all has that distinct old person smell.
I got a bag for my birthday once. It's one of the only presents my grandparents ever gave me. So it's oh wow, it was like a sports bag type thing.
Yeah.
And it just smelled so bad. I left it outside all summer on the clothesline. Rain, wind, sun, and I just couldn't get rid of the smell.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is they probably don't ever notice it.
I think it's in storage now in the shed. It's just it's holding stuff.
Give it shed scent.
That pair of headphones I had for ages, I had those hanging in the shed for 2 years before I even started using them because they're just so infused with secondhand smoke.
Yeah.
It's weird because as far as I understand it, how smell works is chemicals are bonding with your sensory organ in your nose. So you'd think that every time you smell something, it has to use up a certain degree, a certain amount of that smell. So it has to wear out.
Well,
right?
it's radiating off it is more.
Yeah, it's little like microscopic particles.
Yeah, but they have to get used up eventually.
Yeah, but I think if it's just like permeating,
Well, yeah, but
because you breathe out after you breathe in. I don't know if
you
your
know the whole
sensors,
theory, like you let out a big fart and you don't want anyone to get in, so you start like trying to suck in so no one else gets
I
in.
actually don't know that theory. Which paper did you read that one in?
It's not so much a theory, more of an idea conceptually.
Inhale all of your own farts?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I wonder actually if you like. I thought it might be a chemical reaction, so you're actually binding with it, but maybe it's not. Maybe.
Like with food molecules, right? If you like eat a bunch of food and then slosh spit around your mouth and spit into somebody's mouth, which is gross, like they would taste it, right? So you clearly haven't used all those food particles.
Right.
So they might just trigger something, fire the electron, and then go about their day.
If you eat something, then you spit it back out again and you eat it again, it's not going to taste like it did the first time.
It's going to be partly
So on the other side of
digested.
that, could you sniff like a loaf of bread until it had no taste left?
Yeah, like people go nose blind all the time.
No, but like the bread itself, like
suck all the flavor out of bread with
like
your
I give you
nose.
this loaf of bread and you're like,
I think
why does
if you sucked it so much, the bread would literally be like a husk of dust. It wouldn't be bread anymore. You'd have to steal most of what bread is.
like imagine a criminal that broke into people's houses
And
and
just
they just
sniffed their
sniffed
bread.
everything. Maybe
No, he only sniffs their bread and then he leaves.
and your bread's just tasteless. And what if they exist
remember
and
this
that's why
being
bread goes
fluffy,
stale?
It's like a weird, like,
Theory.
Rick Riordan alternate, like, ooh, there are gods among us. There's
Yeah.
just the
Well, it's like
smeller.
there's like super villains, but there's only one, and he's got super speed and the ability to just like inhale like crazy.
Or maybe he has, like, the technology of, like, a vacuum.
Yeah, and he just gets all the
Because
scent.
I wonder, it's probably pretty easy to test whether or not, like, smell things are absorbed by just putting things in a vacuum. Right? And you could test whether or not, you know, the bread still has flavor.
Right. After
X amount of time in a vacuum. It's a pretty
Yeah.
easy test
Well,
to conduct.
there's
but then it also gets dehydrated.
There's
right?
a food preservation technique which is
Vacuum
sealing it
sealing.
in a piece of concrete.
what?
That's an everything preservation technique,
Wait,
actually.
isn't-
Well, it's
Oh,
not.
'cause it
It's,
doesn't allow
it's
microbes,
sealing it
or-
in clay, basically. So
But-
in
Okay,
India,
well, clay and concrete are two very
Concrete's
different
poisonous.
things.
yes, it's clay. Sealing in clay.
I guess depending on the type of concrete.
Uh,
But yeah, concrete's typically poisonous.
There's a video online of it's in India, I think, and they transport a lot of fresh produce for really long distances by putting them basically in these completely clayed seal shells. Then they break them open, and they can take it out, and it'll be
So
fine
do you
months
just
later.
like take a loaf of bread and dip it in some like a vat of clay, or
So you,
do you
you
build
you,
like a
you
pot?
have a bowl
Right,
basically,
and you seal the bowl.
and you put it in, then you put the thing on top, and then you seal it and let.
So you
dry.
could just use like a wax seal or
Yeah.
something as well. You don't have to. So it's not like just clay coating
Yeah.
it and then you.
But it's
kind of
having it be like a wax seal is a good example as well. That would work quite well. It's because when you put a container lid on, there is going to be air leak. You can't.
I think submersing in wax, like just.
I mean, it'd be submersed in wax. That's what you do with cheese.
Yeah, but wax is edible.
Yeah, that's what you do to store cheese. You submerge the cheese in wax.
I don't want to be picking bits of clay out of my cheese.
Wax is pretty inconvenient also, so...
Yeah.
I mean, if it's beeswax.
You could just leave it out in the sun. Well, not if it's cheese.
Yeah.
Then you just have a horrible mess.
Well, it depends on what kind of cheese. I bet there's some cheese you want to leave out in the sun a bit.
No, not if it's covered in wax, is what I was thinking.
Mm.
Because then you have a horrible mess. Speaking of the sun, I want a correction from last time. I talked about the miracle of the sun in Portugal. Do you know about that?
I don't know about
Okay,
that.
so I described it
But you described it wrong.
completely wrong, so I can just do it again. So what happened was, in Portugal, there was not two suns in the sky. The sun just started zigzagging crazily across the sky, looping all around. It was seen by hundreds of witnesses, possibly thousands.
And is predicted by a prophet beforehand.
Well, that's the part I want to get to next, because so hundreds of independent, like possibly thousands of independent witnesses saw the sun just start zigzagging for
How
12
long
minutes
ago was
or
this?
something. It was like 100 years ago or something.
It was in a newspaper.
So during World War One?
No, it was before that, I think. So maybe a bit over 100 years. So this happened, and so skeptics have said about it, this was predicted but so it wasn't, the sun zigzagging wasn't predicted, but there was a saint, I can't remember the time frame, several years in the past at least, possibly hundreds, who said on the specific day at this hour there will be I will show a sign like of God's power, something like that. Or he was a prophet, so I guess he wouldn't show the sign, but he predicted God would reveal his power or something. So that's why there was hundreds of people looking in the right direction in Portugal, because they had all come to the square to see this miracle.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas is that people wanted there to be a miracle, so they saw it. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that could be an explanation. Like, fair enough, a bunch of people just really wanted something to happen.
Yeah.
The cult was officially recognized by the church that was formed by that.
Because of the...
They witnessed it, and there was enough witnesses. It was witnessed by a bishop, actually. And so the bishop got the cult of that saint recognized by the church, so they became a...
So did he become a... Well, he wasn't a saint, he was a martyr, I think.
Yeah.
But did he become... Because false prophecy is heretical.
Yeah.
So... I wonder how that works.
The cult's no longer a cult; it's like a sect of Christianity.
Like, are you on probation until the date passes, and then it's
I
like...
suspect you just try and predict things that you'll be dead before.
Right, but in terms of like getting canonized or not, like, do you like, so this whole cult's following him, let's say.
Yeah.
But does the church start burning those cultists, or do they say, well, wait until the day, and if nothing happens, then we burn?
You do
like,
a little bit of burning if it's a little too heretical with other things they do, you know.
Is that the sort of play?
Yeah, I think generally it's after the death or the event that anything really starts.
So
right?
you just need a prediction that's way out there.
Yeah, exactly. Then you don't have to live with the consequences.
23,506 years, Jesus will return from now. And,
I've been saying for a long time we should just elect a new Jesus. The church has the power. Let's just pick a guy who's relatively nice, and it'll be fine.
Krishna, they tried that. Remember? Well, it happened before any of us were born, but
so I couldn't possibly remember.
Krishna was the savior who was brought to Earth. He was this Indian man who was he was an orphan, and there was a cult formed around him. I forget the name of the cult, but they said he would be like the next savior that would lead people into a new age of dawning. Everything he said was proper and true, and he would speak in there, and everything he said would be true and prophetic. And there was the original organization was sort of like the Masons that was into this. And then one faction of them started going on and on about how special this guy was and how pure, and maybe he was born of immaculate conception or something, or reincarnation of Jesus, something like that. And so it sort of fractured the group, because, you know, the Masons are a bit more just, it's a secret fraternity.
It's a secret
where you
cult where you have hidden knowledge about how everything was formed.
But it's not about, oh, we've got this prophet now. So it sort of fractured the group. So eventually he did speak, and he was just a child, and when he was 18, he was sort of strong-armed into this position of speaking. And so he went up in front of television, huge amount of people, all the cultists, and he said, I'm not the chosen one. Your guys are crazy. Just go home.
Yeah, I think we should do it like a proper election. The church can just host and say, okay, we all agree this is our new Jesus. We're going to listen to what he says and update our scriptures as thus. And if we get a nice guy, bonus. We get rid of a lot of antiquated Bible, and if it's not a nice guy, can't get much worse than antiquated Bible.
We just put everyone's name in a hat on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's God's will, the one that gets drawn.
Actually, that kind of works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. Well, maybe you have to put it in.
This.
I guess it was kind of forced upon Jesus theoretically, but like.
Why did the cardinals vote on the Pope? You'd think drawing a name from a hat would be more.
Well, that way you can have political power within the church.
But in terms of
because whoever they vote for is chosen by God.
Yeah, they're representatives of God.
Right, but
they represent their worshippers in each one of their locations.
No, but they'd have to be a representative of humanity, right? Because if God wanted a representative, then you would just put the name in a hat.
Yeah, no,
I don't know how random chance factors into religion.
Well, it wouldn't be random chance so much as... Well, I guess God can tell the cardinals what to do.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so fair enough.
Yeah, divine inspiration.
Yeah.
Until they try to climb out of the chimney because they're starving to death.
But yeah, I guess that does make sense that they would make the right choice. So you don't need to add... It's just randomness puts it in a bit of a black box. You know, gives God room to maneuver.
I like to think that the cardinal voting room has to be a random room every single year in case one of the cardinals spills the secret passage into it so they can't escape.
No, I think it's the same place.
Yeah, the windows are barred, the door is locked, the chimney is grated over.
Oh, is it like a Thunderdome situation?
Um,
Like 5 cardinals enter, 1 pope is decided?
Yes,
Yeah,
and they can't leave until they decide.
Yeah.
And there's no food or water brought in for them.
Well, that's a pretty good motivation to decide a leader.
Yeah, because I think they had a stalemate that caused this to happen. They just decided they didn't want to elect someone, and finally, I think what happened was the candidates died, and then they had to get this random bishop who was just some like Franciscan monk, and he became pope. So he went from like nothing to highest
But they
authority.
actually had to start barring the windows because they found out one of the cardinals was sneaking out the window and going into Rome to like get food and then climbing back in.
Yeah, he actually see, this might be me spreading huge misinformation again. That did happen, but it might have not been the same incident with the cardinals. It might have been 2 different separate things. Because I'm trying to slowly correct information that I've gotten wrong, which is a lot. Hassan Piker also isn't the biggest Twitch streamer. I was wrong.
No.
He's in the top 20, but he's in the top 10 most paid. So that was like 20
And
episodes
all he does
ago.
is talk for 8 hours a day.
Well,
That's what a lot
you have
of
to be
people do.
entertaining, obviously. Like there's a skill to it. Not anyone can. Well, not anyone can talk for 8 hours a day, but the amount of people that can talk for 8 hours a day is higher than the amount of people getting paid the amount he is.
Yeah.
Now it could also just be luck and connections and whatnot. But
I mean, that's the case for pretty much any
Yeah.
fame in a lot of ways.
yeah, like his uncle's a TV news host owner. So
So he got his start on
yeah,
was
the Young
it?
Turks.
The Young Turks, and then
Yeah.
left the Young Turks to
Although-
do solo stuff or whatever.
To be fair, the Young Turks has never seemed that big to me. Like I don't know, maybe they are. I've never really liked
I
them.
thought they were like as big as BuzzFeed or...
Maybe.
Yeah, they're probably dying off now.
So the only time I really ever learned about them was it was like 2014, and there was some information that was highly contentious, and I wanted to find a good source on it. And I remembered that back in 2000 and this would have been in 2010. It would have been that I was trying to find some information, and I remembered that back in 2007 there had been some contentious information that nobody had reported correctly on except for Al Jazeera. So I was trying to remember, what's the name of that weird news organization with that sort of foreign Middle Eastern sounding name that was like unbiased? So which is kind of funny given that Al Jazeera is Saudi owned or something. So they're not exactly unbiased, but in this case they were back then. They might not be Saudi owned, I should stop. They're owned by some foreign power with reason to manipulate them. I think they might be the state news, like Russia Today is for Russia, or CBC is for Canada. Anyways, so I was just trying to type in like weird Middle Eastern news organization. I got Turks. That sounds right. Turks. Those are in the Middle East. So I watched the Young Turks on this thing, and that was the only time I ever watched them. So that's all I really know about them.
How long does the organization exist? Because I'm wondering, should they be the middle-aged Turks or like...
Well, they're named after the terrorist organization.
Are they?
Well, it's freedom fighters, I guess, because they won. So when the Ottoman Empire fell, a group emerged called the Young Turks, and the Armenians were all slaughtered in a genocide,
Yeah.
which the Young Turks were responsible for. And then the
The
Turks
Young
took
Turks,
over.
the organization, not the newscast.
Yeah,
Just-
and then the Turks took the Young Turks, like Cenk Uygur, after he killed all the Armenians. He took over the Ottoman Empire and renamed it Turkey because the Turks had become the ethnic majority. Because it was the Kurds and the Armenians and the Turks.
Why would you name your
Oh, the Turks were always the majority.
organization after a group that committed genocide?
Well, now this is where it gets weird, and this is where there's a lot of like he said, she said, except to do with genocide. So Turkey says they're the only country on Earth, or one of the only countries on Earth that has never committed a genocide.
Yeah, there's denial of the Armenian genocide.
Because what they say is the Ottomans were in charge when all the Armenians were killed.
So even though it was their organization,
Well, but it was the Ottomans forcing the situation or causing it or something like that. And I don't know how directly involved the Young Turks were in that whole thing or not. I'm not super aware of the history of that region. I don't know if either of you.
I know about that Turkey basically every 20 years, like clockwork, has a military coup that then they get replaced. That happened for about 20 years in a row.
Well, they've been...
Because there's a military coup because the government starts becoming too corrupt. Then the military says, we're not taking control, we're going to put these guys in charge. Then 20 years later, the military's like, oh, you guys have become too corrupt. And so they have a coup, take over, and they put someone else in charge. And that just happened over and over again like clockwork in Turkey.
I don't know why we let politicians use money, honestly.
And Cenk is also Turkish, so he's too young to have been responsible for
The genocide. Yeah.
But maybe he named it after his dad or something. Maybe his dad was.
Maybe.
If we didn't give politicians money, then why would they be politicians?
Well, almost as if their goal should be to improve society with their ideas.
But I think the other way you could look at it is potentially, and I don't know, all organizations or groups or identities, whatever they might be, tend to have multiple sides to them. So you look at, feminists, let's say, they're nowadays quite often seen as annoying or sort of cringy or whatever it might be. But there was a time, and even now, where the majority of them were pushing for equal rights.
Yeah.
So you have these two sides of a group. Or you get the...
Were those organizations that are meant to protect workers?
Unions.
Unions, yeah. Unions, they can look quite... they're quite beneficial to the workers, but then they become corrupt and whatnot. But I'm not even saying become corrupt. I'm saying simultaneously, feminists were saying we want the voting right, and they were also handing out the white feathers during the white feather campaign during World War I, where they would go to draft dodgers, essentially, or men who just hadn't been drafted, and give them white feathers, saying you're a coward, go die on the front lines. And, just hand the feather back. You go. You want equal rights. Off you go. So there's always...
Soon I'll have enough feathers to make a pillow.
Or you look, I guess, contemporary example would be Black Lives Matter, where a lot of the people involved just want police reform and to help out black people, but then the organization itself is massively corrupt, and the leaders have absconded with like 4 million, 40 million, somewhere along there.
I think that's true for any political rally.
Yeah, and that's
like the truckers or whatever that just happened.
Yeah.
I'm sure the leaders made absolute bank with.
Well,
all
they
those
went to jail,
donations.
so they might have tried to, but
yeah. Well, good.
Yeah, you gotta try,
Yeah, Gandhi certainly made a lot of money.
Oh, I wouldn't really call Gandhi modern.
But I would say so. I don't know. There just before Gandhi, there was the Indian Rebellion where they there's a Age of Empires 3 campaign about it.
Oh yeah,
where you play as the starts with an S. Anyways,
Saladin.
No. The rebellion's name, the people. Anyways, they rose up and fought the British, and they lost. And you get like Malcolm X, and you get Martin Luther King. So often semi-unified organizations have multiple faces. So it could be that the Young Turks themselves view themselves as not the ones committing the genocide, and it was people tangentially related or other Turkish rebels that were doing it. It's still kind of weird to name yourself.
Just generally better to not brand yourself where that confusion can be made.
Like, did Martin Luther King even have a organization?
No, it was just the rallies. It was just the...
Because, like, there was the Black Panthers that was... Malcolm X was a part of. But I'm just wondering, like, is there an organization...
Well, there's organizations post-death for Martin Luther, but...
Like, let's say we called this podcast, like, the Sans Culottes or something. Like, it's just kind of weird to name yourself after a revolutionary force, no matter how good they were.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure if the Sans Culottes were... They were the good guys, right? Were they the Robespierre guys, or were they the other ones?
I don't know.
They're the guys that didn't wear pants. But...
I mean, even naming yourself after Robespierre is...
Yeah. Or what if we called ourselves, like, our podcast the Lobster Shells? Like, Cromwell's.
Yeah.
Cromwell, like, he's a pretty solid guy. But I'm sure there was a lot of raping and pillaging going on.
Yeah.
At the same time. So it is kind of...
a lot of executing of people.
Why would you want to tie yourself to... any of that, really? Even to, like,
the especially rebels. If you're not really related to that.
Yeah.
Like, if you're telling the story of Oliver Cromwell, that's a little bit different than just being a news organization that I guess
totally
likes
random.
Cromwell.
But if we named ourselves after, like, a Scottish murder group or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
or
you've
like
got
the
Scottish
IRA.
as well, right?
The IRA is Irish.
Yeah, I know, but that's like a good example of a weird group to label yourself.
Yeah, because
especially because the IRA still exists.
Yeah. But they're also like the IRA are also quite sympathetic to some degree, similar to how the FLQ were. There is a lot of like you get where they're coming from to a degree. It's just their methods.
The SNP, that's the Scottish Revolutionary Group.
No, that's their political party.
Yeah, their whole thing is the SNP's whole thing is separating from England.
Right, but they're not terrorists.
Yeah,
they're a political party.
I mean, you could argue about the SNP. A lot of people don't like them.
Yeah, but the FLQ weren't like there's a Bloc Québécois. They aren't the same as the
I don't know
the FLQ. Right, so the miracle of the sun. before we get... Also, let's not... Well, are we taking off the terrorists or the non-terrorists? I don't know.
Why not both?
Okay.
And then they can fight each other.
If you're not
trying
a
to get to us.
terrorist, suck it. If you are a terrorist, also suck it.
Well, no, if you're,
Absolute centrism.
if you're a terrorist, please don't blow us up.
Have you seen those like political compass and like the coward centrist, which is that small circle in the
Oh,
middle?
yeah, and then it's just extreme.
And then the like the proper centrist, and it's just extremes on everything.
Have you ever... There's a channel called J-Rig where he loves to play with
Oh
that.
yeah, I've seen.
He has
some
one
of
where
that
he
stuff.
says, "We must secure the future for our trans children." So he's doing the 14 words, which is like the neo-Nazi sort of... like, we must secure the future for our white children, I think is how it goes, something like that. And he combines that with trans children, and yeah, absolute centrism. So, yeah, so the miracle of the sun. I was thinking that you can dismiss it as saying that everyone really wanted the sun to be... Well, not the sun, but something to be a sign. They really wanted a sign. They were looking for something. And there's probably a lot... There might have been one crazy person in the entire crowd that actually saw the sun go zigzag. And then, do you want to say that, well, you didn't see God's miracle? Like,
Yeah.
Do you want to be the guy that didn't see God's sign to humanity?
And also the people who say like I saw nothing, probably not recorded nearly as much.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? 500 people saw this, or...
Yay!
Like,
miracle happened.
was it
Nay,
only
miracle
in-
happened.
Was it only in Portugal?
Yeah.
Because the sun's visible in a lot of
Yeah, well,
other
that was the
places.
weird part. It was only in Portugal.
So it must just be
So that was another thing critics said is
part of their culture.
you didn't see other
thing.
people seeing the sun zigzag, and you also didn't have like massive, I don't know, earthquakes or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could have been visually zigzagging, like if there was some lens effect on the atmosphere. But I was thinking that's kind of...
If there was a lot of like heat rising off from the ocean,
Yeah.
the waving could give it the effect of kind of moving left and right.
It wibbled wobbled a bit. Oh,
Yeah.
it's a sign.
But it's kind of weird how the dismissal can be that people were expecting it, so it happened. Because at the same time, then you could deny anything using that method. Like when
Well, deny anything without any other evidence.
like when Neil Armstrong dropped the hammer and the feather on the moon, and they've hit the moon at the same time. It's like, well, that's what he wanted to see. So I mean, what are you going to be the one that denies physics? Like, you can watch the video, but like, am I going to trust you? You just don't want to say the emperor has no clothes, because. So, it is like mass hysteria is kind of funny because it applies to anything, but it also apparently is a thing. Like, I find that very odd.
No, it absolutely is a thing, because something we've been watching is a lot of Ancient Aliens lately, and something they point out is that you see a large increase in like UFO sightings during times of war. When there's big panic and people are super concerned and stuff, people see
Well, that's
stuff
when
like that
the
way
aliens
more
are picking a
often.
side too, though, right? Because like they normally they're pretty peaceful, but then it's like, well, I really like the Axis.
Well,
And
they're-
I like the Allies.
the-
Like, we're
they're-
going to see a lot more
Well,
aliens.
apparently Hitler had a crashed UFO ship that they took a bunch of technology off of to make rockets or something.
Well,
That's how they got the rocket.
there is a report in UFO sightings and reportings after the bombs were dropped. Is apparently UFO sightings skyrocketed, but also after the bombs were dropped, the human population skyrocketed.
Which bombs?
The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs.
After the war ended, you can just say after the war ended.
Well, yeah.
No, it was after the bombs.
Directly.
Like a little bit before and afterwards, they.
There's also the other aspect where I don't know if I've ever told you the story. I've told Connor it, but there was a guy up here who he just went out in winter nights and he'd look up at the stars. And he lived
Yeah.
on like by the elementary school, and he would see the stars just disappear occasionally, like as something was flying over them.
Yeah.
And so he was going on and on about UFOs. And then we had another person up here who saw one of the UFOs in broad daylight, and she went to the military in Northwest Tall. I think they have an air. What?
Northwest Territory?
Yes.
There are air bases in Alaska. And
Yeah, so they went Northwest Territory. They talked to, and they said, I saw this UFO, and they said, no, you didn't see anything. And so this was like the 70s, I think,
yeah.
and it was revealed a little while later that drone technology existed. So there was a secret technology the United States had been developing, and they were flying in that place where there was no people around, so they could just
Yeah.
safely test their technology.
Yeah,
Except
I
there
don't
was people
doubt
around.
that like people do see like flying objects. It's the skepticism is it aliens?
Yeah,
Because that's a pretty big shake up to our.
but yeah, so UFOs though are definitely
Yeah.
a thing, and whatever. Well, I mean, obviously, Connor and I talked about this, where the U.S. military last year released that there's 144 UFOs that they can't explain in the slightest. and they'd turn on and off nuclear reactors, which is...
But they're not aliens.
Well, they didn't say that. They said...
We can neither confirm nor deny, basically.
But they said we have no idea what they are. And, you know, the list of possibilities is quite long. Like, they could be a natural phenomenon we know nothing about. I was reading... There's so much we don't know about the universe. It's crazy. The more you learn sometimes, you're like, wait, this is just kind of up in the air? Like, Venus glows, like the planet.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we have no idea why. It's like, wait, shouldn't... We've been to the surface of Venus. Shouldn't we know why it's glowing? And there's some theories. I think there might just be a massive lightning storm all the time on it, which is causing that, or it might have its own version of northern lights or something.
Yeah.
Or it might just be that our cameras are getting a glow where there is none. Could be a trick of the eye type of thing.
Yeah, like sun reflecting off it also, because Venus has phases.
There's one thing that happened. They used to think Venus had canals, a bunch of lines across it, and so there were sketches of Venus with the first drawings of Venus starting from like the 1600s, I think, and they had all these canals, and they were consistent canals. And then they, you know, as we got better and better telescopes, the canals disappeared, and well, what's going on here? And so they did a couple tests. They have a few theories. They're not 100% sure, but they did a test where they gave someone just a fuzzy image of like a fuzzy circle, basically. And they said, trace all the lines in it. So it's just pure random static. And they say trace all the lines. And people were able to trace lines on it fairly consistently because you just see patterns.
The human mind develops these.
But another thing was they noticed that after they learned about the structure of the eye and blood vessels, so the blood vessels concentrate near the back, I think.
Right in the back. During the
cornucopia.
No, it's where the stem it connects. The nerves connect to the brain. There's a big ball.
So they found that if you drew a picture of an eye with all the blood vessels, it looked identical to these early drawings of Venus with the canals. So they think what might have happened was he was staring at Venus so long, trying to do his sketches and whatnot.
Yeah.
That he might have been seeing the reflection of his eye overlaid over Venus just perfectly for whatever reason.
Well, the glass, right?
Yeah, and just drawing his blood vessels as he...
Huh. So,
yeah, I was actually learning that aliens not existing is a very new idea. It's kind of weird. Like, it was basically... So there's this lady that died at the start of the 1800s, I think. Or she died before the 1800s, I think it was. And she put out a $1 million bounty for the first person. So in her will, she said, I'll give like my estate, basically, give $1 million to the first person to make contact with another planet. However, Mars is excluded because that'd be too easy. Because it's just like, there's people on Mars, so come on, you got to show a technology that's impressive, like contact Venus or the sun or something. Because they also thought people lived on the sun. And they thought the sun was a planet with a very bright atmosphere, or possibly even a flaming atmosphere, but a safe interior. And then I think what happened probably, and they thought there was people on the moon for a while, and I think what happened, possibly, this is my speculation, people just kept looking like better and better. You look at the moon better and better, and you're like, oh, there's no one on the moon. Oh, there's no one on Venus. Oh, there's no one on Mars. And it just like disillusions you time and time again.
But for some reason, there's people on Jupiter, and they don't look like pancakes.
But
well, I think as we understood more, we realized there wasn't any in the solar system.
Yeah, or at least none that's easy to find.
Yeah, and that kind of combined with an evangelical Christian religious, like we are significant in this universe.
Well, that's almost the opposite, though, because then you'd... Oh, I guess, yeah, so you're saying
if you're the only place on life in the universe, then you are pretty special.
So it kind of reinforces it almost. Yeah.
I mean, if something was to live on Jupiter, it kind of changed our concept of what a life form could be.
I think any extraterrestrial life form will.
Yeah, but I mean, how tough something would have to be to be on Jupiter? If, I'm saying, not a small little creature, but something big.
Right, but so xenobiologists have theorized a life form using the existing laws of reality as they are, that could live in the sun. And it...
I guess there's enough energy there.
Yeah, they would be made of... So that they would follow the definitions of life, but they wouldn't be... Like, they're not carbon-based.
Fire follows the definitions of life.
Except desire to reproduce, isn't that one of the...
Well, it does desire to reproduce. Put fire next to something that's flammable.
Yeah, but it reproduces, but it might not want to.
Well,
I guess like
that's the definition of sentience, not life.
yeah, possible. Well, they have most life has a drive though to reproduce.
Yeah.
Whereas fire
They
just
added
doesn't.
an extra rule to get rid of viruses and fire.
Yeah, it's probably sentience or some type of function like that.
I think it's self-preservation.
Because like jellyfish are just as conscious as fire.
I think it's some form of preservation.
I don't think preservation would work,
No.
but because like like
something
krill doesn't really.
If something gets rabies, does it cease to
Yeah,
live
I guess.
before it
Also,
dies?
a sea sponge doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
It just succeeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so the life forms in the sun, they would be made of like.
Glass.
No, they wouldn't be made of matter. I think they would be like multi-dimensional, like strange quarks or something like that. Like,
So they'd be Catan.
well, I guess quarks are multi-dimensional, but well, everything is more than three-dimensional.
They'd be the Catan from 40K. Star vampires.
No, they would be a So you know Conway's Game of Life.
Yeah.
They would essentially, the pressures in the sun and the energy could cause something like that to occur using base building blocks of the universe, is I think the idea. Which is kind of one of the ideas of reality, is that it's just a bunch of, you could look at it as if it's the ocean and there's a bunch of ripples, and the intersection of those ripples creates all the other laws. So there's only like 4 laws or something, and it's, 4 different wavelengths ripple, and then their interaction is the base laws of the universe, like electromagnetism, and then from there you just derive everything. I think that's basically string theory. I think.
I just want
you did the physics, but
Only first year though.
well then I know more than you, obviously.
I want the
I did 11th grade.
Yeah.
I want the giant snake whales to exist on gas giants. Is all I'm saying. They just swim through gas giants.
Yeah, I don't know if Jupiter is ruled out or not, because it's hard to look at it. I don't know if we have or not. I was surprised that we landed on Venus. I didn't know that, but that
The
was done,
Soviets did it.
yeah, like
There's like
ages
one.
ago.
There's like one terrible black and white photo.
Yeah,
And it's just this like charred rock.
yeah, and like they crashed, I think, but they took photos as they crashed
Yeah.
or something.
They landed on the ground, and then I think the capsule survived like 3 minutes in the environment before it totally.
But we now have better pictures of it as well, and it's just ugly. Like
It doesn't look like a good place.
it's yellow. It's a very
Well,
yellow.
yeah, it's a
Venus the
sulfuric
one?
atmosphere.
Yeah, its atmosphere is made of acid.
Yeah, sulfuric acid.
Yeah.
Like Mars has a certain, like, it looks kind of like some places on Earth, like Nevada.
Mars
Yeah.
is made out of chlorine.
It's made of iron.
No, the dust on Mars is a chlorine compound that kills life. So and it's super statically charged. One of the problems with putting people onto Mars is spacesuits can't go inside the building. Basically, what you have to do is you have your shelter, and the spacesuit attaches to the outside of the shelter, and then you crawl in, because the dust is so statically charged and clings to everything that it would just come in with you and you couldn't clean it off, and then you'd have chlorine dust that is bad for life and electronics inside your space.
That was one of the
capsule.
problems with the moon. Since
Yeah.
there's no atmosphere there to weather down the dust,
Yeah.
the dust is sharp.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
right.
dust on
Because
the moon.
dust on Earth is very like kind and soft,
Yeah.
but dust on the moon is so sharp that like you can see photos of the astronauts' boots that
Yeah.
are like 8 layers of Kevlar, and like 3 to 4 layers are just cut off
Jeez.
Yeah,
just from walking in it.
Wow.
If the moon suddenly got a windstorm, anything on it would get shredded.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Actually, part of the composition of that dust and
Good
just
thing
the,
they didn't go to the moon then.
Yeah.
the rocks on the moon. So
Dodged that
there's a
bullet.
museum that had some moon rocks basically sealed, and a guy broke in and stole it. And the museum said, "Please return the rocks. They're poisonous."
Well, they would cause pneumomonosilicovolcanosis, right?
That shreds your lungs.
Whatever it's called.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pneumono-ultramicroscopic
Yeah.
silicovolcanosis. That's it.
yeah. The
Gnosis, not nosonosis. Yeah.
the rocks basically release the dust, and then you breathe the dust in, and you get your
So
lungs
it'd
shredded.
be like asbestos, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, just jagged,
Yeah.
sharp.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds nasty. Yeah, actually, it's funny though.
Both the moon and Mars suck
Yeah.
for different
I
reasons.
didn't know Mars was so bad. I thought it was mostly like an iron atmosphere
And
because
cold.
There's a lot of iron, but it's mixed with chlorine.
I feel like the rovers we've sent on have fared pretty well.
Yeah, well, they fared well because the static, it clings to them, but they can drive and they're not living. It's like, and the rovers are really carefully made to avoid exposed electronics. But why the rovers end up dying is their solar panels slowly get covered in the Mars dust, which is static.
Yeah.
Jupiter is... It's interesting that you're saying life there, because what we do with probes that are around Europa and Titan especially,
Yeah.
is we send them into Jupiter once we're done. Because we don't want to risk them hitting Titan or Europa, because there might be life on Titan or Europa, and we don't want
They're
to
full of water.
kill it with like our bacteria or something.
Yeah.
So, but can you imagine if you live on Jupiter then, and there's just all these probes like...
Well, my thought, what I can
Although
say
they
is
have
a
bigger-
giant space whale that lives on there.
They have bigger problems though, like they get hit by a lot of asteroids.
And
So
lightning.
I don't
Oh,
think
yeah.
our probes would be...
Jupiter's the big soak for all the
Yeah.
debris.
Jupiter is also like covered in the worst storms ever.
Yeah.
Like wind that would tear someone apart if they're in it.
I wouldn't... Yeah. I guess that's why we haven't looked for life on Jupiter, partly because we don't have anything that can survive it.
Yeah.
No.
Although maybe we do, because I didn't know we landed on Venus, so I'd be curious to see.
I feel like our moon, maybe Mars a bit, and the moons around Jupiter, besides Earth, are the nicest places because, like, if you go to Pluto, sucks, and so is Uranus. Like, all the gas giants suck.
Well,
Maybe
Pluto's
yours
just
does.
a rock.
Pluto.
It's just a very, very cold rock.
Yeah, the ground on Pluto is made out of solid nitrogen.
Yeah. It's a very, very cold
Yes.
rock. At least you can walk on it, right?
I think...
No, you can't walk on Pluto. You need extremely specialized gear because when you step on it, even though the atmosphere is weird, the temperature will bleed through it. Like when you're really cold like that, basically all temperature gets drained into Pluto. Like the
Okay,
moon is
well,
the moon is cold.
Assuming you're not going to freeze to death instantaneously,
Yeah.
you can walk on Pluto.
Yeah,
Ralph survived Pluto.
Ralph
Remember that
died
episode of the
instantly.
Magic School Bus where somebody tries
Yeah,
to
that was
kill
Ralph,
himself?
Yeah, that's Ralph.
Isn't his name Ralph?
It was the redheaded guy.
Yeah,
who-
yeah.
And his eyes turned red. That's so disturbing. His eyes froze solid and red.
Like, imagine putting a suicide in a kid's cartoon and greenlighting that. Like, obviously he lives, but he still tried to kill
Well, I
himself,
think
guys.
What they talk...
They
What-
talk about at the end that he wouldn't have gotten a really bad cold. He would have died instantly.
No, what I've heard is you shouldn't... It's like some... I don't know if it's TV code or if it's a recommendation for preventing suicides, but you shouldn't... First, you shouldn't romanticize suicide.
I
but-
think the 13 Reasons Why TV
Yeah.
show, the first season showed the suicide, and that was one of the big backlashes because it kind of shows people how.
Yeah, well, that was the other problem, is you don't want to give people ideas, because a huge thing about depression is you're robbed of all motivation, which it has its advantages in that you can't think of a way to kill yourself, or you don't have a desire to kill yourself.
You're just too
It's
lazy.
too much effort to kill
So
yourself.
one of the common side effects of antidepressants is suicide.
Because you get just motivated
Yeah.
enough, but you're not actually happy.
Yeah, so if you can just hold out for like another couple weeks or months, then they start kicking in properly. But you get that first little boost of motivation before everything's better. And so you kill yourself. So, taking a helmet off while you're on Pluto is fairly safe in that sense.
Yeah, you're not gonna
Encourage
teach
kids
someone
to-
how to.
I'm going to go to Pluto. I'm going to take my helmet off, and then I'll be dead.
And it was also not romanticized. He was kind of a brat.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no, he was. Someone else was being a brat and not paying attention to Miss Frizzle, and so he got really mad at her because. So he took off the helmet.
Yeah, so
to
he's being a brat. He's having a hissy fit on Pluto.
Yes.
Okay, that's right, guys. If you have a hissy fit, go kill yourself. That's what's recommended on this podcast. The official stance.
Yeah.
Magic School Bus is actually a little messed up in general, though. Like the things they do, like going into someone's body, like shrinking it down, or
That's a cliche, though, at this point.
one time the kids thought Miss Frizzle was a vampire because she was making people think of like they got all the parents in an old castle and they're hanging upside down and wearing bat ears and like drinking red wine, and the bat ears was so they could hear better, and they're hanging upside down so they get blood flow and experience what it's like to be a bat. But like from all appearances, that she was being a vampire.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Yeah.
That's the main point. It's not meant to be taken as I don't know. I mean, we've had teachers that would seem crazy to outsiders as well, I'm sure.
That's true.
So another
No, they are crazy. They're just competent enough to make it so the crazy isn't anathema.
yeah, I think Miss
Yeah.
Frizzle's a great teacher. Like what other, like imagine the,
Well, she has the power of magic,
Yeah.
which is a bonus.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. Like imagine you get to your next year and you're just, man, this is not the same. I miss Miss Frizzle. That was great.
Also, she had pretty much an infinite budget, which most schools are working on like a shoestring. So,
And when you're like talking to your friends, like you're in your 30s and you're like,
oh yeah,
man, remember Miss Frizzle? Oh man, that was a great class.
can't believe he.
It's all
killed
downhill from
himself
there.
on Pluto.
Not another free field trip.
Yeah, that one guy.
Yeah.
So you know about I think it's called Oumuamua.
Nope.
It was an object that flew really close to Earth, just flew straight by Earth, and it was shaped very weird. It was like a giant tube,
Oh no, I do know about that.
Oh yeah.
and
They
well, it was very flat as well.
yeah, but they had a spaceship in a movie based off that thing that lands on Earth.
Oh, well, this one missed, and
It landed. It didn't hit Earth. It landed.
it what did it do that was weird? It wasn't a comet because it didn't
accelerated.
It accelerated, yeah. So it wasn't a comets can accelerate, but this
Yeah.
thing wasn't a comet.
Well, anything captured by a gravitational field can accelerate.
Right, but it accelerated.
Past the sun while leaving.
Wait, does the gravity? You'd have to move closer to the object
Yeah.
to accelerate, though, right? Than
Yes.
if you use the gravitational field.
Yeah, no,
Although if you're slingshotting around,
Yeah.
right, you
It
got
did
a massive
slingshot,
Yeah,
that's
it
what
just
you're
went straight by.
Yeah.
So comets can accelerate because gas expands and flies off of them, so the comets increase speed.
Yeah.
Whereas
Also, gravity is an acceleration force.
this thing just accelerated, but they didn't. So they think it could either be a comet that they, for some reason, weren't able to detect the gases coming off of, or it could have been a probe similar to Voyager, coming from some other civilization.
Yeah.
And it's just there because we only saw it for like 12 seconds or something, so it was a very short
Or
period.
missed.
They were just
Yeah.
opening salvo in a long range war.
Well, I was talking about this concept like a really petty alien species that basically it sees Earth and it sees life is starting to form on it.
Yeah.
And so they have really good math, really strong technology, but they don't have faster than light. So they just launch an asteroid at Earth with their calculations and they know it's going to hit. And it's like thousand upon thousand years later,
Like
just,
one volcanic eruption saved us.
yeah, we're just
we'd like go off orbit time.
Yeah, well, just like 2 centimeters, right, could
Yeah.
throw their entire math off over.
So the three body problem is kind of about that, actually. It's one of the great works of Chinese science fiction, and the aliens, they want to conquer Earth, but they're super far away, and there isn't faster than light speed travel. So they develop a technology to unravel dimensions. So they take a like 11-dimensional object and turn it into a 1-dimensional object. So they have this. Well, first it's a 2-dimensional object, so they have this like 4 light year long thing that can cut through anything because it's only 2-dimensional, and it lands on their planet and like kills a bunch of people. But then they turn into a 1-dimensional object and launch it at Earth, and they use that to have a sort of quantum entanglement between them and Earth, so they can coordinate their plans millions of years in the future for the invasion of Earth.
Yeah.
So they send out a fleet and they send out this quantum entangled device. And then their plan's just to wait for like a couple million years until everything's in position, and then they can coordinate properly with their entangled device. And yeah, so everything they do is based on like just long distance attacking, essentially.
Huh.
And the reason they do this is because their planet is in a 3-body system, so there's 2 suns, and so they can't predict natural disasters because it's well, I don't know if it's impossible, but the calculation power required to calculate a 3-body system has to be done right. So that's how it is. You can simulate it, but you can't calculate it with any equations that we have currently, and it might be considered impossible. I'm not sure.
well, it's because every time you calculate, that moves, and you have to recalculate.
Yeah, but I don't know, someone smart could get on that and like, figure out a solution. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
Or replicate it close enough to be functional in 99.99% of
yeah.
situations.
So these aliens try all sorts of solutions to figure out, because the problem is they're incredibly resilient. They can put up a shield that basically protects them from any disaster, but it takes a long time and it's very risky. Like half their population dies. But that's better than a natural disaster which kills out 99% of your
Yeah.
population. So all they need to do is to be able to predict this, when is a disaster going to happen, and then they're set. But they can't even do that much. And so the book's all about them developing methods, and it's really cool because they use the Chinese as an analogy for the aliens. So it would be like if the Chinese on Earth had the same problem where they had to predict what was going on. So they have to build a supercomputer in like the medieval ages So they get the
Yeah.
entire Chinese army laid on this massive plain, and each one of them has a sign that either has a 1 or a 0 on it, and then they have people beside them that tell them what to do if something happens. And so then the emperor will say something like, what's 3 plus 4? And then so like people will put up the binary for 3, and then that'll be the orders for other, because you have to only obey a very simple series of commands. It's like AND gates, NAND gates, XOR gates, OR gates,
Yeah,
NOR
you
gates.
can build an entire computer with those
So
five
you only need
chips.
to know 5, is it?
It would be AND, OR, XOR, and then you need a NOT gate, and that's about it.
Yeah, so 4 or 5.
Yeah, 4 or 5 chips.
And so you just need to teach these Chinese soldiers 4 or 5 instructions, and then you can build a computer using the entire army.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really cool where he has the scene where he asks them to calculate this thing, and the entire army is just like lifting and raising. And then there's a problem where he sees people raising things in a loop, just over and over again. And he's like, oh, this guy didn't obey his orders, and now we have like this infinite loop going on. He's like, oh, replace the component. And so they bring in a new regiment that slaughters the old regiment and then takes their place.
Huh.
A little brutal.
Yeah, well, it was meant to represent China as well.
Yeah. It's
'Cause-
amazing how complex the machines we build with those, because I've done like classes on building base level like CPUs and circuitry.
Yeah.
So I've actually like built like an ALU unit using that stuff.
What's ALU?
Arithmetic logic unit.
So you can do like math?
It would do addition, subtraction, it would negate, and it had one other function. It might have just been store. Or
You know,
not do
fighter
anything.
jets, they have like tubes in them that air rushes through,
Huh.
and that's a computer that can do like basic calculations, or at least the old ones do. I don't know if the new ones have this.
The new ones just have computers.
But you could just like have a series of tubes do basic calculations for you because the air is rushing through them. It's the same thing as an electron going through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy that all our memory is just like all the computer memory, it's pretty much just a thing called a flip-flop.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different, there's the D flip-flops, there's JK flip-flops.
For J.K. Rowling. What are we talking about?
Well,
Just how memory works in computers is just like
the-
flip-flops.
The Minecraft mod basically
Like the shoes?
it adds all the different gates in redstone, so you
Yeah.
can have a bunch of different redstone gates.
Well, Minecraft already has them all.
Well, it
You can
adds,
build them.
Yeah, it adds them more simply in one block pieces though, so it's one block
Yeah.
components.
Well, there's an amazing redstone mod for Minecraft where I think if you use stone slabs and put the redstone on top of that, you then have a tool which can shrink a 3x3 area into a single block.
Huh.
So then you basically build circuits. And so you can just keep shrinking these things down and down and down and make whatever you want.
Yeah, a computer.
Yeah, well, people have made... I saw a graphing calculator made in Minecraft, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous.
or a TV,
Yeah. I made...
phone that can call
Oh
people.
yeah, a phone. Although I think the phone might have used command blocks. I'm not...
Well, you do need command blocks at
Yeah.
a certain point.
Yeah, so that's kind of not the same thing. Because I saw a guy made Minecraft, was it?
Yes,
Yeah, he made Minecraft in Minecraft.
using command blocks.
Yeah, it was a text-based game. But I saw something else. It was in Factorio. Someone made a dungeon crawler.
Yeah,
So-
I believe that.
So they made a monitor using
the
blocks.
drones.
No, using like copper and iron
Oh.
and whatnot. So it was like a 16-bit monitor. And then the monitor projected a 3D environment. So they made... I think you could only... It was maybe a maze, maybe not. I don't think you could do anything other than navigate the maze. But it's amazing once you give people simple logic. It's kind of weird because I have a basic grasp on basic logic.
Yeah.
Like I'm not great at it, but...
You've done a couple truth tables.
I've done some Minecraft stuff mostly.
Okay.
But I know, like, if with a bit of a refresher, like AND gates, NOR gates, that sort of thing. So I kind of
Yeah.
get on a basic level how a computer works, to an extent.
Yeah.
And I know a little bit of programming. So on that end, I know something. But I have no idea how you get from A to B because it's just...
See, it's still like I know
There's, like,
quite a
magic
bit of
in the middle.
programming. And I know quite a bit of logic.
Yeah.
But there's that huge step, right, between
Yeah.
I could build a circuit that would be a calculator.
Yeah.
Like I can design everything in a calculator, the LCDs, like all that stuff with like just gates and electricity, right? I can design that. And I can write programs that do all manner of complicated things, right? But actually building the machine that gets
Yeah.
all the way up to here is crazy.
The other one that blows my mind, so the main programming... Like, I know very little programming, to be clear, but the main language I know is C++. And I can kind of I can think of a way I could give you like graphical representation using C++, right?
Yeah.
But the only way I can think of doing it would be so like cycle intensive that I'm like, is that what they do? That can't be what they do, but maybe it is. Because my way would be essentially, you just cycle each pixel over and over and over again every time it updates, or even if it doesn't update. Essentially, I'm sure there's smarter ways to make it so it only updates if necessary.
Yeah, well, that's how TVs used to work, right? Those old LCD televisions is just one line of pixels being projected.
I've made the start of a game, and every time you give a command, what it essentially does is it hits enter like 20 times to blank the screen, and then it gives you like a fresh screen.
Well,
and I don't know if there's a workaround for that, or if what computers actually do on some fundamental level is just shunt everything off and like go to the next thing.
Well, they probably optimize it so, like, for example, this application we're running now, it's not replacing this.
Right.
It would just be replacing this stuff that's getting replaced, right?
I mean, that's clever, because I have no idea how I would like differentiate those things.
Well, you select, like, this is just a 2D matrix, right? So this is 0, 0, this is probably 128 by 1080 or whatever, or 1980 by 1080. So, right, you just, the application knows in this range, here, that's all stuff that's going to be edited, right? So it just flags this area.
And so you're directly controlling the pixels of the screen, I guess, rather than just a command. Because I guess that's the other thing, is the only thing I really know how to do is within the command console. So like actually affecting the pixels on the computer myself is not something.
Our dad before there was desktop interface in command console, he was making a video game for Star Trek.
Well, he modified an existing game.
Yeah, he modified an existing game.
Yeah, and I think that game probably worked along similar principles.
Yeah.
But there isn't, as far as I'm aware, maybe I'm wrong, there's no way to actually just clear a screen in Windows. Like, there's the clear screen command. But it, apparently it does all sorts of, like, it's very intensive to use, so they recommend not to.
Yeah.
So it does all sorts of dark magics.
Yeah, like, I've never developed a UI or anything with a UI.
Yeah, like...
So I couldn't speak personally.
Like, there's... Okay, basic logic, black box, C++, black box, UI. It's like, where did the UI come from?
I've used HTML
How do you know where the
to
mouse
make a
is?
UI on the website, but not the UI.
Right, but I can use let's say GameMaker to make a UI. That's fine.
Yeah,
but the question
that's just an engine, right?
Yeah, and HTML you could view as an engine because it has, and C++ also has
HTML is a text editor to an extent.
But you can also say like put a link here, essentially put a thing.
Yeah, well, it's a text editor.
C++ also has that functionality using Microsoft tools where you can use it. It has
it's a library file.
How do you get the first UI?
Yeah. How did the person
Some
make
guy
the UI?
Smarter than you, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think computer scientists are getting dumber over the years.
Oh, I've been ranting about this for a while.
You hear interviews of like old game developers who are just like, I saw a YouTube video on Banjo and Kazooie.
Yeah.
What was it? Oh, I forget. It's the one was it Banjo and Kazooie? It's some old PS1 game.
I think that was on the 64.
Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah.
Crash Bandicoot is the one I'm thinking of. And it was a dev on that, and he was talking about, we started like deleting stuff, the main files, to improve the amount of RAM we had. And
we had a whole podcast where I talked about a few of these things.
Yeah, and like we developed a compression algorithm so that I keep forgetting his name. Crash Bandicoot. So like the actual character Crash, they developed a compression algorithm so when he was moving, they didn't have to do all these floating point operations as many. They'd only do them for like the head and shoulders, but they kept the waist just as a static image while it was moving, so they didn't have to do as much math.
Yeah, it's crazy when you...
Well, that's the basic principle of baking graphics is what they did there, but they did it in a very clever, innovative way.
Well, I told you about the Blade game, right? Yeah. Where they took this 3D model and then they sliced it into half a 2D image.
Yeah. And
then they just had it kind of like jitter back and forth so that it gave the illusion of a complete 2D image, so it used half as much space.
Yeah. Or like because old discs, right, used to be able to hold 300 megabytes, I think, but the RAM used to be only like 16, or it was some like crazy limited memory space within the PS1, so they developed like page table algorithms to use the disk itself as virtual memory, so that they could have bigger level designs than anybody else in the business at the time.
Well, that's why Mario rewrites itself if you play it too much. Like, if you play it certain ways, you can rewrite Mario by moving him.
You can access certain registers in RAM that shouldn't be accessed, and then you can put information into there. In a lot of like N64 games, that's how glitches are like done, or certain exploits are done.
It's kind of how the Wii was hacked, because it was Legend of Zelda. If you typed Epona's name and you made it more than 72 characters long or something like that, it allowed you to start writing code directly to the game. You
started writing it into a register that wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Because I know for like, I think, what is it, Super Paper Mario, if you hit like an input and that gives you an item, if you start capping over the limit, you start going into the other registers, so you can move into a certain position and like activate the teleportation to this location register, and you can skip huge sections of the game.
Have you seen there's a new controversial N64 any game speedrunning technique where you play Ocarina of Time?
Oh yeah, into all those booster memory.
And then you quickly swap out the controllers, because the N64 had a feature they never used where it knew the last two games you played, or the last game you played, I guess, technically.
Yeah.
So if you swapped out a game quickly, it'd be like, oh, you played Mario. Do you want a Mario skin for your Legend of Zelda game? But they never used that. But using that, as well as this weird glitch in Ocarina of Time where if you like backflip off a bridge after doing a bunch of stuff, it allows you to write, I think it's arbitrary code, so you can do whatever you want, to whatever you stick in next. So you play Ocarina of Time in the right way to create whatever code you want, flip it to the other game, and then you can have whatever you want.
Teleport through,
in the other game.
I feel like speedrunning at that point is a no.
Well, it has a few problems. It's the reason they never used this feature that the N64 have is because they were worried about damaging everything, because you're rapidly swapping stuff. So the players that would utilize this would be putting their equipment at risk. So it would be unfair to the players that didn't want to have that same risk.
Or people who are using emulators.
Yeah, well, the emulator might be easier.
Emulators, you can just write anything to the register anyway.
Although
just manually. So
most emulators aren't perfect, so and it would be illegal to be perfect, because then you're actually violating copyright. Because the Wii's source code was actually released, so you could actually make a perfect Wii emulator, but it's illegal to do that. So if the Dolphin team could say, well, we've been doing it for like 20 years, we're just really good at what we just got it perfect, because that's how you get an emulator perfect, is you basically run a bunch of games through it, and if they work exactly as expected, then great. If not, you tweak it and see if that makes it perfect. And
I think on the hardware side, one of the really impressive things about the Game Boy cartridges and the Wii things is that they actually still run.
Instead of...
They're useless when you put them in, because their cartridges for gaming aren't like a CD that you read. They're actually a small electronic that has a power source, and their batteries.
Right, yeah. Well, and some of them are dying.
Yeah,
some of the
but just how long?
Game Boy Color stuff.
Yeah, because I guess they store the memory inside there. So
but the Game Boy, like, some of them still run though, and that's insane how these batteries have been living that long.
Actually, that's something to keep in mind for SSDs, because discs are actually etched in stone, literally. Whereas
you're just writing in and out.
Whereas SSDs, they'll fail eventually, and
so will discs. I think the lifespan's pretty comparable right now.
But there's I was actually doing a bit of stuff on coronal mass ejections, just reading a bit about it and watching a few videos about it, where solar flare basically just happened that wipe out everything. So in 2014 there was a coronal mass ejection that was massive, and it was exactly in Earth's orbit, and it would have been equivalent or bigger than the one that happened in 1859, which caused telegraph wires to catch fire. But it was in the opposite direction from Earth, because the sun also rotates. So if it happened 9 days earlier, it would have hit Earth directly, as point blank. And I was thinking about that. I was like, I'm going to look up, maybe putting my digital books in some sort of storage that could survive that, like figure out some Faraday cage stuff.
Yeah.
So there's now apparently SSDs are generally believed to be safe from solar flares, and non-powered devices in general are considered to be fairly safe. However, a EMP from like a nuke, there's concern for even non-powered devices. But I thought, just to be safe, I'll just wrap them up in some tinfoil anyways and stick them in the basement.
One of the funny things is, so mass ejection happens. Well, let's say we can predict it, because you can actually look at the sun and see if they're coming or not. So it's coming, and so everyone's like, oh, better turn off your phone, turn off all these devices. So everyone turns off their phones. Then all their phones end up exploding because the phones actually can't turn off anymore.
Well, take the battery out if you can, I guess.
Yeah.
But even then, there's
they have other second batteries that...
Yeah, to keep track of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be bad. The estimate I read was that it would take 10 years to recover from a solar flare.
A really bad one.
Yeah.
It's dropped, the estimate.
Has it?
Because electrical engineers really work on this problem and people in the field. And so a lot of power stations are actually already safe from them. Like they have fail-safes you can put into them. There's basically, because you can predict when they're coming, you can see it coming, you have enough time to get a whole bunch of stuff done. So
yeah, you have to have like 8 minutes at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, unless it's moving the speed of light.
If it is moving the speed of light, that's 8 minutes.
Yeah.
No, because you have to see it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you'd see it.
You're not...
Like, if it's moving at the same speed as its image, you
I
wouldn't
guess
have any
then,
time at all.
yeah.
You're not looking at it while it's happening. You're looking at the sun going bubble, 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 burp.
But I also,
Yeah.
I don't know if we have any images of the sun or not. Like, I have no idea if they're all just computer generated or artist renditions or what.
There's scopes you can look at the sun through.
Right, but like
Yeah.
those things where you see the loops coming off of the sun and what, I don't know if that's real or not.
So the telescopes can see those. A lot of those aren't real, but they are based on actually looking at the sun.
But
doing that.
I saw this representation of a coronal mass ejection equivalent to the 1859 one.
Yeah.
So this would have been fake, obviously, coming off the sun, and it had the Earth superimposed, and it's like 30 times taller than the Earth. Just this thing coming off the sun, and then the entire thing just tears off and flings at the Earth, and you're like, wow. The Earth can handle that? Like,
Well, do you
it can
remember?
wipe out all
We've
life.
got a big magnet.
Do you remember
thank
Maze
goodness.
Runner? How basically one of those happened, but it was really bad, and it was so bad it actually blew through the magnetic field and took out the side of the Earth that was facing it at the equator. Sorry, not the equator. Is the equator the center?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the flare hit the Earth and went through the magnetic field and basically fried it, and then destroyed a biolab that then released the disease that was killing everyone in Maze Runner.
I don't
Yeah,
remember
that was the Maze Runner.
I remember it was just like zombies post-apocalypse.
Well,
with
it's a
kids
trilogy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they
I
learn
read
more
all
and
the
more.
books.
Yeah, so the disease was caused by that flare hitting and basically frying the equator of the Earth on one side, and then the disease escaped from it. But so the equator on one half of the Earth is basically a blasted wasteland because it got hit by... And the disease was called the flare because the flare let escape.
Yeah, I don't think that would happen from what I...
No. No, we've got a very nice magnetic force field.
Although that was the concern, the 2012 end of the world prediction, that was the concern, was that there'd be a solar flare at the same time the magnetic field went down.
Yeah.
Because, the magnetic field appears to reverse, at least based on the ocean floor.
It does reverse.
Well, it appears, because we haven't actually seen it. I mean, it's
well,
pretty obvious that it does
it's-
based on what we see, but that could be, who knows, maybe there's a regular period where the magnetization of lava flips for... I mean, that'd be the same idea,
Yeah,
I
that'd
guess.
be the same thing because that's what causes the
Yeah, I
magnetic
guess
field.
that'd be the same idea.
I mean,
Okay.
Also, the amount of hours that the Earth spins actually changes.
Or what if there's like a
Yeah.
elf that arbitrary... Well, even if the elf is doing it, it's kind of the same.
A
It's
day-
still the same.
Yeah.
You're still swapping it, right? The mechanism behind it isn't.
Okay, what if it... Okay, I'm trying to come up with a way where it doesn't swap, but it looks like it swaps.
Days used to be
Some
23
guy with a
hours
rake.
long.
There's an elf that takes your measurement thing, right, for each congealed lava, and he just, like, flips a reading. He's just like, me.
Well, maybe they've accidentally had their gear upside down all along.
They
Yeah.
just flip it every once in a while.
Yeah.
Every time they find the proper.
It's like when they got the
Interval.
Hubble telescope up, finally, and they were looking at all the readings, like, the universe is fuzzy. It's just all a bunch of fuzziness, because the lens had a distortion, so it didn't work. But,
I discovered a new planet. Oh, that's a bit lint.
yeah, so the concern was that the magnetic field's flipping might have a downtime, and then the 2012 prediction was, and that'll be the same time as a giant solar flare, because that was during a solar high, I think, was the prediction. So you don't have a magnetic field, and then you get hit by one of these things.
I mean, if you don't have a magnetic
But
field
then
for
we would
any
have seen
amount of
that
time, isn't
wipe out
the Earth kind of
dinosaurs.
screwed?
Yeah, the sun's always ejecting that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
We would get hit by a lot of solar
we'd
winds.
lose a ton of atmosphere.
So the worst, yes, not from that, but you know black holes that have gamma
Lasers.
When a neutron star is first formed, it releases a huge amount of gamma radiation for a
at
couple
the top,
seconds.
and you see the flash.
Yeah. So it's very brief. It's only about 300 miles wide, I think. So you have, imagine shooting like, thousands, millions of light years, a 300-mile wide beam for 13 seconds and hitting anything. It's very unlikely. And what they think would happen if it hit Earth, there used to be a thought that it would just sterilize all life on Earth, basically. as in like everything dies. It's like you just bleached everything. Everything's gone. They now think that what would happen is the ozone layer would actually stop it because ozone absorbs gamma radiation. So Earth just seems like it's heavily shielded for one thing.
So the atmosphere would just catch fire.
No, it would disappear. So on one half of the Earth. So, and you could kind of see what would cause that. Like there's sort of identifiers that you could see that. And the largest extinction to ever happen in Earth's history, there's been about 13 of them. Might have been the Precambrian one, I can't remember.
There's not very many things Precambrian.
It seems to line up with the atmosphere just disappearing, essentially. So they think that might have happened to Earth before. So
well, that could also be a result of there's suddenly a increase of things that aren't based off chlorophyll. Like, because we got so much oxygen in our air because we evolved plants, right?
Yeah.
Or huge, probably sheets of algae is more likely.
Well, yeah, that like the cyanobacteria was one of the other mass extinctions where they filled the air with oxygen because it used to be CO2 and it killed off like everything.
And then if all that oxygen, suddenly we get the Cambrian explosion where there's all these life forms that soak up oxygen instead of vice versa. We could see the atmosphere dip down, right?
Yeah, I can't remember why they thought this was what happened, but and yeah, it'd be interesting. Because it is funny sometimes how, if you look cross field, you get very contradictory things about the same events.
Yeah.
So the example I think of all the time is there was a bunch of biochemists trying to fold a protein, and they were at it for years and they couldn't do it. And then they got a chemist in, and the chemist did it like they didn't ask the chemist to help them. He was just visiting for some other reason. It's like, oh, what you guys working on? And they showed him, oh, we can't solve this protein fold. It doesn't work like normal biochemistry. And he just looked at it and he solved it in like 15 minutes. And it's just, sometimes people know things that are in different fields.
Yeah.
And if you could it'd be neat if you could take every problem on Earth and just shuffle every human on Earth past it. You'd solve like everything.
Yeah.
Because there's someone out there that knows what to do.
Some depraved weirdo.
Who knows what to do with that? Yeah. Another back to the computer programming one that Roller Coaster Tycoon.
It was coded in assembly.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever worked in assembly?
No.
That's madness.
So is that above machine code or?
Everything in assembly has a corresponding one-to-one translation to machine code.
Right, so you might as well be working machine.
Yeah, it's pretty much that, but syntactically easier to read.
Like hex editing?
It's like
similar.
like everything you do in assembly, you're like interacting with the actual hardware.
Yeah. So it's Heroes 4.
Heroes 4 they mod through hex editing. So that's probably slightly more complicated than assembly in some ways because you don't know what they correspond to begin with. But on the other hand, you're typically not you're typically treated more like a config file than like, because you want to say, okay, this guy's 10 attack, where's the value 10 in this entire program?
Okay, and so then you just adjust that kind of value.
Yeah, but the modders have over time gotten more and more complex with it, and so and I don't know if they use like a shell program on top of it to do what they want or not, but you'd hope they do just to make it easier on themselves. But at some point, I think it would be.
So is Roller Coaster Tycoon then moddable, or is that just
the first one?
You'd have to basically make the game yourself, right?
Yeah, I think every game's theoretically moddable, but if you add the source file, right, it's gonna have something that says like LDI this into this register, right, or pull this section of data from RAM directly.
So it'd be about as easy as making it yourself. I guess.
Yeah, you'd pretty much be like, okay, so instead of this being pink, I want it to be red. You'd go in and you'd configure that hexadecimal value that in the register that says, okay, now this is red.
So it would be about as easy to mod as a game like Heroes 4.
Yeah.
Where they have nothing they can do except look at the values through the hex editor.
I guess theoretically you could just extend more stuff, but you'd need all the source files, right? Because you need to know how it does everything. They
kind of do that with like Nintendo game modding to a degree. Like I was playing Legend of Zelda with some mods.
So someone you hear is a criminal.
And it definitely has some weirdness. Like they add an extra song to the dungeons, and all your colors invert because there's so little data to work with. It gets very weird, and so they have to be very careful with what they do. Or like another problem that can occur is if you add like 3 pillars. I think there's room for 14 other sprites or something like that. But if you add more than 14, it shifts every sprite over by 1, and then the game's just ruined.
Well, those old school games and just the hardware limitation is so much more extreme than anything we work with now.
But as you were saying, the programmers now, it'd be nice if we had that mindset back then with the amazing power we have now. Because Moore's law is that technology doubles every 18 months. So the power of computers doubles every 18
We're
months.
about capping that, though, because our CPU processing speeds are getting so fast that the speed of the electricity would interfere.
Do you know what's funny about...
Can I finish the Moore's law thing?
Yeah, well, I was going to say something on Moore's law with that.
Okay, but you see computers doubling every 18 months.
Yeah.
But the programs don't feel like they're getting twice as fast every 18 months. And so obviously the programmers must be getting, like they're adding more to the programs.
Well, yeah, they're getting bigger, right?
But they're also getting
Bloated.
very bloated. Like,
well, yeah, because graphics have gotten so complex that they're taking up huge space.
there's that, but then there's also people are using Unity to code games instead of assembly. So you have all this.
Yeah.
So Unity, if you add the After Effects to a game, you can take a game that would have been 15 megabytes back when it was made, and if you made that in Unity, suddenly it's like 30 gigabytes. Because, well, maybe not that extreme, but
because of all the shaders.
because all the shaders and whatnot that might not even be used, they're just loaded into the game as part of it. And
all the multiple baking layers.
But it's also, the trade-off is, it's similar with the internet, is how useful is it compared to how hard is it to use, right? Because at the beginning of the internet, anybody could write an HTML file, right?
Yeah. So it is nice that
But it wasn't nearly as robust as the internet we've got now. The trade-off is that now you have to have specialization to code in the internet and build the websites properly.
But it is nice that there's like brilliant game designers out there like FromSoft.
Yeah.
Who can't code, really. Like, they kind of suck at it. But it's nice that they're able to share their brilliant game design with the world.
Yeah.
Because...
well, game design and developing the game engine are, like, two very different things.
Yeah, and so it is nice, like, even though it is bloated, and you should probably be able to run Elden Ring on a much weaker computer than they require.
Yeah, it's poorly optimized.
Like,
it's so poorly
I put...
optimization and bloating are two different things, right?
So I put Code Vein on my computer, because I was just... which is... my computer's not very powerful at all. It has a 1030 graphics card, which is not even a gaming graphics card. It's used for consumer it's used for office computers just to let them run stuff a bit better, basically. And Code Vein runs fine on highest settings, like totally fine. I was actually, jeez.
You know what the craziest one for me is Elite Dangerous. That's like the best optimized game I've ever seen.
I think Factorio kind of blows my mind when I...
Yeah. Well, if you compare it to like how terribly Minecraft runs on everything.
Yeah.
The amount of stuff you can have going on.
Well, except
Factorio.
My laptop. My laptop ran Minecraft fine. It was weird. Like, my laptop sucked, but
I think it runs better on low resources than high resources for whatever reason.
But yeah, Minecraft is
I
definitely...
should test on my laptop, because like my gaming PC that I have, which is very old at this point, but it can run like the most recent like Tomb Raider games on like decent specs. But it doesn't have issues with a lot of things. But Minecraft, it really struggles.
But Elite Dangerous in the graphics department is definitely beautiful and runs fine.
Yeah,
and you see that with Unreal Engine 5 now, where they're using like a millionth the resources to get the same results, and it's like amazing how much more efficient you can be.
And that's partly just probably comes to do from compression of things, or they simulate them in different ways, right?
Yeah. Well, have you seen? I don't know if you've ever watched 2 Minute Papers.
I haven't.
There's people that come up with like a new light scattering formula that's simultaneously more accurate and uses like 1/10 the power, because it's just we get better at math over time as well.
Yeah, because I was about to say like old school light shading things. I was probably like ray tracing, and I don't know too much about this like video game graphic design stuff because I'm more specialized in like just data analytics. But I'm pretty sure ray tracing is here's the center point. Here's this, here's this, here's this, here's this, right? And those are all going to be floating point values, which are just
that's basically
way less efficient than integer values.
Ray tracing is basically actually adding lights to games. Most games don't have lights.
Yeah, they simulate it. They have here's a light source. Here's
here's what the light here's a light source, and here's what this light source should look like on this object.
Well, yeah, here's a sphere of light.
Yeah.
And then here's...
But I think...
But things aren't even coming off it. It's this sphere of light, and then it's going to have zones of space coming off that zone light, and then this is what it should look like on that.
So it switches the texture to what the light should be for that texture.
Yeah, it adds a shader on top, where ray tracing is actually calculating where the light is.
And the reflectiveness of the material.
But ray tracing is still using that built-in, here's the shader.
Yes.
Whereas Lumen, which is the new system that Unity's developed, illuminates objects itself, so you don't have to
It
make
makes
shaders
the object
anymore.
itself brighter,
Yeah.
so it doesn't have to code the texture on the texture, so it's way more efficient with simple.
Yeah,
For space, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's...
It also probably doesn't have to calculate floating point operations.
Yeah, it's
which
way more
are
efficient.
super-
I don't know why.
Floating points are super.
Every single light point you add with ray tracing makes it way more, like doubles each calculation every light point you add.
If you're... Like, I don't know what it's doing, but you're saying the floating points. But if you eliminate floating points, then aren't you going to be illuminating things that are slightly off? Like
Yeah.
So, but I guess that doesn't...
if you're just adjusting this texture, right, you're
Yeah.
just adding a slider, right? You're making this glow,
Yeah.
whereas before you'd be calculating where it lands on that floating point, right? And the difference between a floating point and an integer, at least in my mind, is the floating point is always going to take that entire array of data,
floating
right?
point's storing every calculation that's been done to it, right?
Well, no, a floating point is pretty much how they work is it's still binary, right? So it's a base 2 system,
Yeah.
but at a certain point you put a decimal. So it's got to calculate all that information, right? So theoretically, the difference between a floating point value of the difference between floating point of 1 and 2 is going to be a smaller difference than of 30 and 40, right? Because you've shifted the decimal. So the smallest iteration of a floating point is going to be 2 to the power of negative 31 instead of 32.
I thought floating points were... Well, that's way more efficient than my thought on floating points. I thought what you did was you stored every calculation that had been done to an integer in a floating point. So it got... so you divide it by... So 1 divided by 3, and then you just always divide 1 by 3 every time you call that variable,
Okay,
essentially.
no, it's not nearly that bad. But the thing is with floating points is if you have like a 32-bit system, right, it's going to be taking up that 32 bits entirely.
Right. And then you add just a little bit more and suddenly...
If you add a little bit more, you've got to shift the decimal place and you've got to
increasing
calculate...
the power by 1 just a little bit more.
Yeah, you've got to calculate pretty much a 32-bit thing, whereas 1 is a 1-bit operation, right? It's very fast and only has to check one thing. Because in the actual hardware, right, when you're comparing, an addition in hardware is an AND register, pretty much, or a XOR register, where if this bit is 1 and this bit is 1, it makes a 0, and it carries on to the next thing. So it takes 3 inputs, a carry, and then the 2 things you're adding. This is probably a boring podcast, but it takes a carry and the 2 things you're adding, right? And if they're different, you put a 1 out, because it'll be 1.
Yeah.
If they're both 0, it'll be 0 and it won't output a carry. And if they're both 1, then it'll be 0 and it'll output a carry, right? So doing that 1 time is way different than doing that 32 times.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know if every time you add a 1 and 1, if it's using just the 1 bit or if it'll go through the entire thing. I suspect they probably have efficiency methods in there, because then a 64-bit operating system would get exponentially slower if it had to do for every operation.
There's something called ray marching, which is way more efficient than ray tracing. Connor played a game on your channel called Marble Marcher, which used ray marching, and it's way more efficient. But it has some
weirdness.
You have to know the exact shape of the object you're shining light on for it to work. Yeah. So you can only do it by essentially making your objects fractals. So you can exactly know what they look like. But you were going to say something more about Moore's Law.
Moore's Law, so one thing they've constantly said, Moore's Law has reached its peak.
Yeah.
And it never has each time they said that.
Yeah.
And even on the fact of moving faster than electrons can travel, and one of the other problems is the components are getting smaller than electrons, so electrons start teleporting, basically.
Yeah.
But that's when you get to quantum computing and you just use that teleportation to your advantage, where you observe the teleporting in ways you want to, and you observe it going faster in ways you want to, and so you have observation gates, and so then it can get even faster.
Quantum computing is kind of weird because Moore's Law is that power doubles every 18 months, whereas quantum computing would be more like the power goes up 1,000,000-fold every 30, 40 years. It's kind of...
Yeah. My understanding of quantum computing, we're still a fair ways off.
Yeah.
Because the way they operate is instead of binary bits, they've got things called qubits.
Yes, qubits.
Which can be 1 or 0 or 0 or 1, from my understanding.
Yeah, qubits, you need observers in qubits, and it's a lot of power and it gets very hot.
Yeah, so I was about to say that the power consumption and stuff, we just can't have a household quantum computer yet.
No,
There's websites where you can go on and simulate little things with them, though. I think ICMB,
there was a
CBM has
app years
a
ago
website.
that you could it would simulate quantum computing. I think using conventional computers.
Yeah, this is like you actually use a quantum computer to.
Right.
Some companies have some, and you can just kind of publicly access its resources.
The thing that was mind blowing about this app was it was a puzzle app to move atoms, because atoms exist along a
Probability curve.
Yeah, which is called something, but I forgot. Probability curve, essentially. And so to move an atom without collapsing the wave function is, I guess that's what it's called, tricky.
Yeah.
Because you have no idea how it's going to react. Like if you use lasers to push it up, it might just melt. Like its probability, it might all go to the edges. So you want to keep the probability in the place where your laser's pointed. It's very tricky. So they made an app where your finger is essentially a laser, and your goal is to move an atom from one end of the screen to the other, and get the most atom you can in the fastest possible time to the other end. And the thing that's mind-boggling is they have like a computer running the atom simulation for you on their server, and it's going like crazy, and your phone's heating up like crazy, and it's so easy. It's just like you just kind of go like, woo, like not only the direction you move matters, but the order you do things in matter, because you're working with very weird probabilities.
Yeah.
But it's so easy for a human brain to do. It kind of makes you wonder. Like, that kind of shows that computing isn't over just there.
And part of that app was teaching the computer how to do that.
Yeah, that's probably where you enter machine learning, where it doesn't actually do it, it simulates doing it.
Well, that's a whole bunch of graphical advancements. So
there's physics simulations that do that now.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, graphical advances. It's like, well, we could simulate this, or we have a machine that knows what the simulation looks like, and it can do it way cheaper.
Yeah.
So water should look like this. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Instead
the
of
big
getting
one.
honey.
For fluid dynamics.
Fluid dynamics is
They
usually
just
honey
show
or
a video
gel.
of a bunch of water sloshing around, and then you put it in, and then it can predict how water will slosh around in that shape.
You were on podcast ages ago where I talked about a computer that eventually was just an image displayed on a screen of a machine learning computer. So now that you've taken a programming course, do you agree with me?
I've done some machine learning, actually. It's actually understanding the middle part is relatively complicated, but if you treat it like a black box, it's actually very easy to do simple machine learning.
Well, I've noticed every paper with machine learning, they have this image where they show here's our training data, and then they literally show a box, and then they show here's the results. And
the black box is hidden Markov models and Bayesian networks, and it's pretty much just the most complicated probabilistic math you can think of.
And so, does anyone make those? I mean, obviously someone did at some point, but do most people doing machine learning make them, or do they just take one and
they just take one? They use TensorFlow, or they use PyTorch, or they use scikit-learn. They use
so the reason the papers do that might also be because they have no idea what's going on.
One of the huge advancements in some things is when someone actually makes a new one of those equations. That's a huge advancement.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there? Because there's advances with machine learning, but advances in machine learning would be...
there's...
There's also different techniques of training models, right? Because I don't know all the vernacular, but there's pooling and there's batch samples. And...
Could you get GPT-3 to make a machine learning... Well, that's the singularity right there, isn't it?
That is the singularity.
If you could make a computer that can make a better computer, then... Yeah, right, okay. So that hasn't happened yet, obviously.
Yeah, but to answer your question, I think the amount of data you would need to have a computer that is just a machine-learned algorithm would take probably the training time and the resources needed to train that probably are a long ways out.
But what if it wasn't a computer? What if it was programs? So you have Skyrim as an output, so it's just generating the world on the fly for you.
It takes a lot of power to actually run through that. Once the model starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the output takes longer and longer and longer because it's got all these nodes of probability that it contends with.
But Bethesda makes the Skyrim program, and then they just give... Daggerfall, right? It was procedurally generated at a time when that wasn't really a thing, and it's absolutely massive. It's still one of the biggest games ever. But every single copy of Daggerfall has the exact same procedurally generated world.
So they just procedurally generated it and then
ahead of time, stuck it on a disk, and sent it out.
Yeah, so theoretically you could do that. Theoretically, if you have the thing is that we don't really have data sets big enough, because how many Skyrims do we have?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to make here's a bunch of maps, feed it in,
is one Skyrim not enough?
I don't think one Skyrim
would give you
you would overfit the data. Right. It would only output something very similar to Skyrim.
Well, what if you did that then? Like, that would use way less power, right? Because they just say, here's this image is coming up and this image.
Well, how much? But you'd also have to.
It would probably take up a huge amount of space.
Well, the thing is that do you want to be able to play the game, right? Because you can't have something that outputs the pictures fast enough through machine learning, right? That's going to take longer than just working within the frame of a game engine, I think, at least.
Yeah, I think there's potential. Well, I mean, we've already seen that with the GTA overlays that they've done, where they took a huge amount of, it was California, I think, footage from California, just cars driving and buildings and all that. They stuck that through a machine learning program for models. So you have a polygon that looks like a car, and they say throw a car on top of that. Then they stuck that over GTA, and they made a photorealistic GTA. So you can already do that. So that can run. So obviously there's already.
But you have to think of a machine learning algorithm more like a function than like a program. So it's an input-output machine functionally, right? Is a machine learning thing. You give it a ton of input, and you tell it what the output is, so it has a frame of reference. Then you can give it an input that you haven't told, and then it predicts an output.
Yeah. I guess you couldn't have Skyrim 1-to-1 because it would be making it up on the fly anyways.
Yeah.
Right. So, because one thing I've used is called NVIDIA makes it. I forget what it's called. But you can draw a picture of like a tree, and it'll give you a tree, and then you draw a mountain behind it, and it'll give you a mountain. And so you can make these realistic looking things with just basic drawing. So in theory, with a game like Skyrim, you could do the same thing, but instead of drawing a tree, you move forward, and it gives you the result of that. And you turn right, and it gives you the result of that. Because it's the same, here's my input, there's the output idea. Or much more obvious is the Dragon AI, where you type in what you do, and it tells you what happens using a storybook. And then you'd use Dragon AI with a image. Now, the problem with Dragon AI is, and with all of us, I guess, it uses a lot of power still.
Yeah, well, have you know those things, that program that you can turn something into the Starry Night Sky?
Yeah.
And so you say, I want to turn this image into this art style. And it says, okay, I'm putting that into a queue. And then it starts working on it. And it works on it for like a good 6 minutes. And that's one image.
Not really anymore. If you go to those sites now, it's super fast.
They're a little slow.
You can type in like I've been to ones where you don't have to go in a queue. You just type in I want an image of a dog walking another dog with a hat on. It's like, man. That one you can't access. That's but close to that level. But those do exist now.
Yeah, but it still takes like a few seconds.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to do that with a video game where you have to redraw every single and.
So I think the ideal would be a hybrid model.
Yeah.
Like the GTA thing, where it makes the textures for you or something.
And something I can't really speak to is once the model's finished training, how fast does it output the data?
Because that's the big one.
Because maybe if something's immediately obvious, it takes no time, right? I'm sure there's built-in optimizations you can do, but in an afternoon, I could create a machine learning model that will tell you whether or not it's a photo of a duck. If you give me a data set of ducks, a data set of not ducks, I can use a machine learning library. It'll take me probably half an hour to have a trained model that will tell me, is this a duck or is this not a duck, right? So that type of stuff is relatively easy to achieve, because it's the biggest mitigating factor is the more complex stuff you do, the more complex stuff you need for resource wise.
So I guess the ideal is Skyrim. There's so many elements that go into it. So it'd be the amount of the GTP3, for example. It's just text. I say this happens, and what it's chewing through is, I think, 60 to 90 gigabytes of data every time it makes a response. So that's quite a lot, and it's quite slow.
Yeah, and that's below average for a heavy machine learned model.
So, this is the output. It's already done its learning, I think. GPT-3 is the output already, and then it's just accessing this massive library to come up with options. Because it's an AI which completes books, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so it says, well, the book would go like this, and it takes quite a while, a couple seconds, and you need quite a powerful computer. So you if you had a powerful computer, you can do it, or you can use their server.
Yeah. So I know training the model takes tons and tons and tons of resources. I don't know if using the model takes.
So in GPT-3's case, using it does take a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking is ideal is not an entire world, because that, as GPT-3 demonstrates, is complicated. but something similar to water, where water we know is very simple for the AI. Like, it doesn't take much power for the model to output an answer.
Well, that's because really what you're doing is an image or a video in the machine learning context. It's just an array of data. It's a flat line of numbers, right?
Yeah. And so using that would be kind of the ideal, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're saying, okay, I'm not going to generate an entire story, an entire world, because there's infinite possibilities for what could happen. But and also I have to store everything if I want it to be consistent. Like, I don't want you to turn around in a circle and teleport. That'd be weird. Which happens a lot in Dragon AI when you play it. So what you could do instead is just say, well, look, I'm going to make that creek look pretty for you. There.
Yeah, there's stuff like that you can definitely use, and I think
they're already putting that
stuff,
into the latest versions of the big video game making software.
Unity,
Unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal's already using machine stuff for generation.
Yeah, I think that what was it? They re-released GTA San Andreas in like an updated resolution, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty well theorized that the entire upscaling was just AI.
Oh, definitely.
They just took all these character
stuff
models
that was so
and
messed
all
up.
this stuff, and they just...
No, you definitely do that.
And that's why stuff like a bolt ended up as a sphere or a circle, because
it's
it just
perfect.
smoothed stuff in predictively.
Oh, if they basically put that into Blender and cranked up the details like that. So in Blender, when you're working on something, if you want to make it like a bolt, you're like, oh, but I want it to look smoother, like more solid. You can give it more triangles, but then that will round the edges. And so if that happens, then you can basically force polygons in certain areas so they won't warp, so it stays tight.
No, they didn't do that.
No, but I'm saying what they basically did is they didn't do any tightness. They just went crank it up.
No, they didn't do it. They just retextured stuff using AI upscaling.
Yeah.
So,
well, upscaling is basically what I'm saying. It's adding more polygons.
No, upscaling is adding more pixels. So what they're doing is they're filling in the gaps. It's more like anti-aliasing in 3D environment, whereas upscaling is you say, this is what a face looks like. Using these pixels, give me the best face you can make that looks like these pixels. So you see a lot of mods do this. So there's AI upscaling for Daggerfall. And it leads to some very weird blurred sort of expressions because it's trying to fill in the pixels evenly. So it gives you the same effect as the paint filter in Snapchat, or as in painting over an image on your computer with it. And it looks good. It's surprisingly good, but it definitely is lazier than just redoing everything yourself. But one of
good way to make money.
NVIDIA's biggest tricks right now in their 3000 series is DLSS, which is something super scaling or sampling. So what they do is they actually run the game in a lower resolution than you have it set to, and then they use an AI on the fly to upscale it to a higher resolution, and that saves enough power that it's worth it, obviously, because increasing resolution, it's kind of weird because for a human eye I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but for computing power it is massive. Because
like we were saying earlier, right, if you're doing a monitor, right, and every pixel has to be put in manually, and I don't know if this is the case, right, if you do 600 by 600, that's what, 36,000 pixels.
But if you just bump that up to 700 and you're like, oh, it's only a tiny bit taller, but it's suddenly you're up to 4,900.
Yeah, your area is increasing exponentially.
It's almost twice as big.
There's this bit of VR technology, which
50%.
is, so you have the VR goggles on, and it has eye tracking, like no eye tracking, there's cameras on the inside. And so it's looking at where you are looking, and where you're looking, it makes good graphics. And then based on people's peripheral vision, how visual decay happens, it then decays the graphics all around the area, so only where you're looking is good graphics.
That's what games do already.
Yeah, but this is a VR development of looking where your eyes are looking.
But it's more tuned. It's even more efficient.
Yeah, because like if you play Skyrim and you whip around in circles and your like computer's not fast, you see stuff.
It'd be interesting.
Blur and then unblur.
So there is eye tracking technology for computers, like those control. I wonder, you could actually probably make a game run slightly better if you could link those to a degree. But
most people don't like their video cameras watching them at all times.
Yeah,
and also you usually
make your setup much more expensive.
Yeah, you also usually use the focal point crosshair to where you're looking at a video game.
Yeah, but it's annoying if you you don't want to look in the corner and be all blurry.
Can you imagine how much you could miss with Dota?
So you would want, but if you had an AI,
Yeah.
like you have one of these eye trackers, it could actually see where you were actually looking.
Yeah.
Your friends couldn't watch you play a game.
No.
Yeah.
And you also...
Wouldn't be able to record it unless you're recording in a different...
Oh, yeah, you can record it.
Yeah.
Unless you're recording it like Dota, which Dota actually requires what all the bits are doing. And all
Yeah,
the
but then...
graphics.
If you're recording an instance with full graphics, you're not saving any power by having the blurry screen.
Well, one of the interesting things...
Unless you have like a second graphics.
You could, I guess, you could have something upscaling it through, so you could be downscaling it there and upscaling it.
There's very
Maybe
few
that's-
games that do this, but there's a huge problem with someone wants to be a VR user and they want to play video games in VR and show it to people. And so there's things where it compress it so it's like you sort of get what they're seeing. But there's this other technique that few VR games do, which is it has a record function in the game. And so basically, you play the game in your VR.
There's a camera like by your
It's
head.
that camera behind your head
That's a good
that
idea.
stabilizes and shows what's important.
That's a good idea. One thing I've seen is just show one eye.
Yeah, well, that's what most things do. Is they compress, show one eye, and they get VR cameras actually stretch and warp, so it just makes it not a flat. It makes it a flat screen.
Yeah, the what was it called? What are we talking about? VR
VR.
Yeah.
camera expansion. I have no idea what I was talking about.
That's fine. None of us do.
No, I know about this. Like, this is an area of great interest for me. Is I really love these advancements. Like Unreal Engine 5, I absolutely love. There's only one game in it, as far as I'm aware, so far, which is Fortnite.
Makes sense.
Yeah, well, that was their test run. So when they released the beta last year,
Yeah.
they switched Fortnite over to it, and then they've spent the whole year just like playtesting it hardcore,
Uh-huh.
basically, because it's, I think, the most played game on Earth. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty good stress test. And yeah, it's been working, and the systems, like the resolution is now, they can have billions of triangles on screen at once. They can have lumen. They can have sound propagation. They can have destructible terrain that doesn't use anything. They can have photovoltaic scanning using your phone of like any object. So any game developer can go outside to a rock, just take their phone, move it around the rock, stick that in a game.
360 image, and then
And like that's always been well, not always, but that's been a technology for the last decade or two.
yeah.
But now you can do it with a phone in like a couple minutes. So.
Yeah, the interesting thing is how the games development industry and the like VFX industry, they kind of build
actually,
up on each other constantly.
Unreal is used for making movies. So
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely has that overlap right there.
Yeah.
What was the program that Lord of the Rings used for
I
their
think The Matrix was made in Unreal Engine.
their armies?
Oh,
Colossal?
it's like Large or something, or Colossal, something like that. Fight. Yeah, that was a Lord of the Rings used a video game to make their scenes. Unreleased video game. It was more of a simulation game. But I mean, that's kind of a shame they didn't release it, because they had basically the first totally accurate battle simulator.
Yeah.
And I think you know about that glitch where they gave everyone like a bit of morale and stuff to make it a bit more realistic. So the battle of for Isengard, they stuck everything down, and all the orcs ran away from the Ents. So,
Because the orcs, we can't win. We're out here.
Okay, we got to make the orcs a bit braver.
Yeah.
We want this to actually look like something.
Well, what's insane though, so they have this AI, and they generate that, but everything's really ugly. So after they generate it, they then go and paint over all the models.
So they used it as a fight director, not as a...
Yeah. No, so
Yeah,
basically...
because the visual effects for video games in like 2012 or not even 2012, 2001 too, wasn't nearly good enough to be on camera.
So they went and painted over them, and then they put actors into the scenes.
Like, why
So
didn't they
there was
just-
like a dozen extras in the area, and then they painted over all the other ones.
Why didn't they just get like a Chinese film studio to coordinate a battle for them? Like, because we've seen movies where they do a great job of battles.
The scale of Lord of the Rings battles had thousands.
Remember that one we saw where they fought the calligraphy school? And
Yeah.
they had like literal army. Like, I don't know how much of that was fake or not, but the armies looked massive.
They were using clones.
Yeah, a lot of the time in Lord of the Rings, what they also did is they'd have one group of people do something, and then they just...
No, they do that for a lot of things. Like if you want
Yeah.
to film a show for like the History Channel, let's say, or just a documentary about Mongolians, right? And so your crew has about 20 people, And so the scene where you have the Mongolian army charging on foot towards the thing is you get a green screen.
Yeah.
And you have a guy run by wearing one costume. You have like a group of people run by wearing different costumes. Then they put on different costumes and they run by the screen again. Then they put on different costumes and they run by the screen again. And then they do actions. Then you take all that footage and you give it to your editor. And then the editor spends a day making that battle.
Yeah, Hitler did that during World War II. They had an invasion force march into France. And then at night they all left. And then the next day they marched into France again. And so they made it look like they had twice as many soldiers as they did.
Headed that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just keep doing that. Get a steady, like, stream. They've got infinite soldiers. We don't know what to do.
Wait, that one has the exact same mole of the one yesterday.
Well, I doubt the spy planes or whatever.
But
I'm saying you do it enough times.
Yeah.
Then you recognize Sven with the gammy leg.
The thing that does, which I do like, but it's also kind of, like a game like Factorio can exist, and then you look at a game like RimWorld, which is like barely runs on anything, and you see like obviously you could optimize this game so much more.
Minecraft, you guys are saying there's troubles running Minecraft.
I want to talk about this.
There's Bedrock.
There's Bedrock, which is better, but it's still not.
No, Bedrock runs amazingly. It's not just better. It's amazing.
Well, I think it's like twice as good or something.
It's more than twice. It runs really well.
Notch put on his Twitter a while back. He made a bit of like a Minecraft thing from scratch again.
Yeah.
And he was working on the scale of billions of destructible objects running like much faster. So like millions of times more objects than Minecraft running thousands of times faster. And yeah, I should have... If I did it again from the start, I'd do it this way instead.
But that could also just be a little simulation, right? It might not be the actual game that you can interact with nearly as much.
Yeah, because that's the other thing is you give games like RimWorld or Minecraft a hard time, and to an extent I think it's deserved, but it's also what are you willing to sacrifice for that optimization?
Yeah.
Whereas I think a game like...
Minecraft's kind of hard to give a hard time because each object has destructibility and permanence within the world and memory, and you can unload areas, then reload them, and they'll stay consistently changed.
Yeah.
Minecraft is really impressive on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about on a previous podcast, the fact that you can save game in Minecraft is kind of mind-blowing if you think about it.
Yeah, I think the way they do the world loading is they have like 4 layers, and the first layer is just like this is the basic blocks. Right.
And then the other is player
and then
actions.
It'll like here's an ore, and then here's this, here's like the shrubbery, and so it builds all these layers on top of each other. So it might have, there's probably a piece of data that's just like, 4 numbers that represents here's a chunk of stone that looks like this, right? And then there's 2 numbers that says here's a coal vein.
But I think
number 327, right? Because it's all procedural, so it's got all these.
The fact that you're saving game though means that it's keeping track of everything you've done. So I think what might be
it's
going
just writing
on,
that to a text file, pretty much.
But it's doing that fairly efficiently as far as like the text
you're
files.
saving like 12 numbers.
You're
one block is one number.
No. There's no way it's that inefficient.
No, I guess you're right. Yeah.
It's definitely it definitely will build. Here's a layer of stone. Here's a layer of dirt. Here's a number that represents how much intermingling there is in those.
Well, I'm saying with your interaction.
Like if you build a house, what's it doing to save that?
Yeah, well, you could represent a wall as 1 number, right? Or as like 3 numbers, right? So here's wood, and it's this by this.
I wonder if they could have how many blocks are in Minecraft? Like 500? They could have 500 worlds, and each is just a series of like compressed on-off values.
If you wanted to do really, really complicated.
No, I don't know if that might be less efficient.
They probably just have number and then XY position and placing a block, right? Saving 3 numbers.
Yeah.
Or 4 numbers because it'd be block XY Z position. That doesn't take that long, right? And it's stored within this chunk file, right? So while you're in a chunk, it's got that chunk file open, and everything you do is saving it live, probably.
But just all those shortcuts, wrapping your head around making them and having them, it's pretty impressive.
Well, that's the difference between like a computer scientist and a programmer, I would say, because pretty much anyone can program. It's not hard.
You can make Minecraft, but making it like efficient and
making it efficient and developing those like revolutionary technologies
So the coding tutorial video I was watching, it was Code Beauty, I think is her name. And she was showing how to figure out if all numbers between 1 and... It was her example of using loops. So she's like, okay, what all numbers between 1 and 10,000 that are prime numbers. how do you do that? So she made a program to calculate those. And so I watched that and I was thinking, you calculated twice as many positions as you needed to, because by the time you've gone halfway through all the numbers between 1 to 10,000, you've gone through every number that could be made up as a prime, because if you go to 2, so if you have like 10,000 divided by 2 isn't prime, that means everything below 5,000. Yeah.
2.
And if you go to 3, then everything below 3,000, everything above 3,000 you can ignore as well.
Yeah.
So you could be way more efficient theoretically, although I've heard...
Hunting down prime numbers is one of the biggest things in like computer science, because there's no pattern to it.
But you can definitely...
we know that they're always next to a divisible of 6, either above or below.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Because if you take a number that's divisible by 6, right?
Yeah.
Above it, not divisible by 2, not necessarily divisible by 3, or not divisible by 3. The number above that one, divisible by 2. The number of that one, divisible by 3.
So you could be way more efficient then.
Yeah, so theoretically, after 2 and 3, you could check every number divisible by 6, check above or below it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. And I guess the reason...
And that would reduce your runtime by over 6. But the thing is that algorithm efficiency, there's a notation for it called big O. And even if you're dividing that by 2, it's still the end game run time or time space is still big O of n, right? So the efficiency you're saving in linear time, so it's not really that relevant.
And I was also wondering, you have to make the computer think of the division, right? So is that actually more efficient than just doing 5,000 calculations? Because they can do the calculations pretty fast.
Yeah, division's pretty slow in computation, I think. At least from my understanding with assembly, you don't really... And dividing by 2 is super efficient. Dividing by 2, you just shift the bits left. Because in a base 2 numerical system, same with a base 10 actually, if you want to multiply by 10, you just add a 0 to the bottom right, or take a 0 out. In a base 2 numerical system, same thing. You add a 0 or take away a 0, right?
Huh, I never thought of that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but to be fair to Code Beauty, first of all, it was a tutorial video, so she's not going to go into an efficiency thing.
Yeah, and big O notations.
And secondly, and I've heard this said a lot, don't try to outsmart the compiler, because it has all sorts of efficiencies built in that'll do all sorts of tricks to make yourself more efficient that you could potentially even overwrite, making your code overly complicated trying to save.
Yeah.
So, like, once you have the program, then you can see which one's faster compared to, but... Apparently, the people that write the compiler are pretty smart and think of these things ahead of time.
Yeah,
so.
People who write compilers are some of the smartest people on it.
They're like...
Yeah, that's where all the good programmers have gone.
Well, nobody wants to write a compiler. I haven't met anybody who's interested in that sphere because it's such a pain in the ass. Because I've had like an assignment where I made like a basic level programming language within a programming language, pretty much.
Yeah.
So it has like representations of variables within the language, and here's how functions work and stuff like that. And it's a hassle. And I don't even have to decide basically the execution trees on how all that gets executed in what order.
You didn't go through the effort of basing it off the Bible?
No, I didn't.
Oh, like Temple OS?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kernel, I think it's... Right?
Well, that's an operating system. Yeah.
But, yeah, apparently that's... I don't know anything about that sort of thing, really, but apparently it's quite impressive what he did with Temple OS.
Oh, it's super impressive. He's nuts, but it's super impressive.
Well, he's dead now, but, yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot his name. Davis. Guy that did the glowy thing. FBI agents, you can see him everywhere. They glow in the dark. Hit him.
Oh, yeah.
Was that where the glow in the dark comes from?
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was...
really mentally unhealthy.
But the other thing was that he was... it kind of fed into the illness that he live streamed a bunch of stuff. So he became quite memed because people would harass him, essentially, which didn't help with his paranoia and whatnot. And it sort of... He ended up homeless and... hit by a train eventually. They think it was suicide.
But... Yeah, I think it was suicide. I didn't hear how he died, but I think it was suicide. He was also on a 48-hour sleep schedule for a while.
And he only drank Coca-Cola. So I honestly think if he fixed his sleep schedule and wasn't drinking Coke all the time, it might have solved like half his mental problems. Because his sleep schedule was crazy.
It was on a 48-hour schedule, so he'd try and stay up 24 hours, then sleep 24 hours.
Oh.
Yeah, nightmare.
And to stay up, he was drinking Coke all the time.
Yeah.
So it's like, you're wired with caffeine and you're not sleeping right. Of course you've got all sorts of schizophrenia and paranoia and
I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Well, one of
a lot of mental health can be solved by eating properly and sleeping
exercising.
properly. Yeah.
Well, so
not to reduce people's mental illness.
In the
you're not you're lazy and you eat shitty.
Psychology experiments
do,
where they make someone basically stay awake for as long as they can. So after about 24 hours of staying awake, it's very common for you to start seeing things that aren't real.
Yeah.
Like prolonged wakefulness makes you dream while you're awake.
Yeah.
Or things just change or shift. Like one of the really interesting ones I remember is they got a guy, he was awake for I think 36 hours to read something and write it down what he read. And then a little bit later, like maybe an hour later, they got him to read it again and write down what he read. And it was completely different because he actually couldn't read anymore. His brain was just telling him this is what's here. And so they were both slightly coherent, what he wrote down, but they were entirely different because he was no longer actually able to process properly.
Huh.
Literacy is very weird, and speaking, because they're a part of the brain. And you think they're integral, but they can be disconnected, like with a stroke.
Yeah.
And there's also kind of dementia. I saw a video of it on YouTube recently called, starts with a W. But you can speak perfectly fluently, but your words are nonsense. So they gave an example of this person's like, how you doing today? And it's like, yeah, we're going to go on the ship later. I just waved at that person. Have a nice day. It's like, oh, and you've been having a good day? Oh, it's a pretty horse, all right, and we're going to ride it all day long. It's like, so they make these like coherent sentences even, but the words
aren't connected to the meaning of the words in the
at all.
brain.
But the thing was, you could tell by the guy's expression and the words he was using that there was a slight amount of communication. You're like, okay, he's being friendly. He sees people in the distance. And so you like when he said goodbye, he said something like, "I hope the world keeps existing for you." So he was trying to convey like raw ideas almost rather than words. So it's almost as if speech has a first telepathic component, and then the layer on top of that is logically breaking it down.
Yeah, we build all this meaning in our brains, and then we siphon those into chunks.
So we create an image, like not necessarily like a visual image, but a telepathic image of what we want to communicate, and then we decipher that into something. And we send that forward. And I think that's probably where speech impediments come from too. People have the meaning they want to convey very clearly, but then you're saying and you're like, and because your tongue and your lips aren't keeping up with your image in your...
Yeah.
One of the shames about the sleep experiments is we don't do them anymore.
Oh, it's torture.
Well, it's torture, but also it causes permanent damage.
Huh.
The 3 guys who participated in the longest wakefulness, each of their families said after the fact they were more irritable, angrier, their personalities changed slightly, like in ways that were negatively correlated, and so you can't ethics boards won't let you do it because they look at those experiments and they go, this caused permanent lasting damage to these men.
I wonder if that has to do with sleep loss is cumulative, right? If you lose 1 hour of sleep every day, you've got to sleep 1 hour extra every day.
So it's pretty hard to catch up.
So I wonder if after you stay up for 36 hours, if you can possibly sleep in enough.
There's a secondary problem to that. So the men, when they went to sleep, this was one of the things they're interested in. How long would you sleep afterwards? And I think they slept longer than normal. So normal sleep cycle is about 8 hours. And they slept between 12 to 16. And in all long sleep experiments, no matter what the time the extra sleep you get up to of being about 12 to 18 and 16, that you never get more after that. So you can actually only sleep for so long extra and then nothing happens afterwards.
See, I heard about something that was completely the opposite. There was a kid who he played video games for 24 hours, and they wanted to just, or did he stay up for a week or something? No, he tried to stay up for a week or something like that. Just playing video games and doing stuff.
Parents weren't home, so...
No, it was a part of a study. He volunteered. He was a teenager that volunteered for it. And then, maybe not a study, because it's just one guy. I mean, it's not a great sample size. But,
well, that's another problem, because you don't know how detrimental it is. And so if you want to do a study, you do it on 3 guys. These 3 guys had bad reaction. Maybe if you do it on one other guy, he'll suddenly be more positive towards his family.
Well, that's something else. Is the minimum study size for psychological experiments is 30. So,
yeah.
I mean, 3 people is kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, that's a preliminary investigation, I guess. But so this
deciding whether or not you can cripple 30 people for life.
So this kid, anyways, he stayed up for whatever amount of time, and then he slept for like 16 hours and he was fine. So that was a while ago that this was.
Yeah.
And I didn't read any study on this. I just
Well,
read that.
it's they slept to that point and then they woke up. Like you only sleep for so long, then you wake up and you appear to be fine. Like you're no longer tired after sleep for that. But the families and like the afterwards observations, it had messed with them.
Maybe they just couldn't tell the kid because he's a teenager.
When I was really young, when I was like 8, I tried staying up for like 2 or 3 days straight. And I think I got like 32, 33 hours.
I might have stayed up for 2 days in a row once. I'm not sure. It was when we were coming back from Hawaii.
Yeah, that's another thing is like long plane rides.
My
like that.
sense of time from that whole event is so mixed up. I don't know if that was a day or 2 days. Like, I'm not sure.
The longest I've stayed awake is about 36 hours.
Yeah.
But I try not to, like, even 24 hours is pretty nasty.
Yeah, I no longer pull all-nighters.
I don't know if I've even done 24 hours besides that Hawaii thing. Like, I've stayed up to 5 in the morning, but that's only 22 hours.
I've definitely pulled all-nighters like quite a bit when I was younger.
And then you don't sleep the next day, sort of thing?
Yeah, and then I like go to bed at like 8 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock.
Right, so you're getting close to 30 hours there
Yeah.
then. Yeah. Or even...
But I haven't felt it. I did. Maybe it's because you're young.
Yeah.
But I never felt like that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've... Well, I had a problem until very recently where I wouldn't get untired. So, like, I think it was diet. Like, it was diet
Yeah,
related.
there's a lot of factors.
But yeah, if I stayed up like an extra hour, I'd be a little bit more tired, just no matter how much I slept after that. So, like, I could gain it back in like minutes, basically. Like, sleep an extra hour, get back a minute, and it was. The first podcast of this, I sound very different and very tired.
Well, so
I'm out of it.
The condition of
I haven't slept for like 2 years.
chronic fatigue, which people with sleep apnea actually get, is chronic fatigue, is even if you sleep, it doesn't help you.
Yeah, that's basically what I was experiencing.
Yeah. So
And then once I changed my diet, it was about a month later, I suddenly started feeling incredibly tired. But if I like put my head down, like I was just sitting in a chair and I just went, and then I just like sat there for 20 minutes and I felt so much better. I started feeling my tiredness and I started resting from it, and it was like it's like I just suddenly discovered a massive weight and it started like evaporating.
yeah, well, chronic fatigue is basically so you're awake and you're draining the battery. Then when you go to sleep, the battery's not getting drained, but it's not getting charged.
Yeah, that's what I've described. Yeah, exactly. And I am of the belief that there isn't really a difference between depression and chronic fatigue.
Well, chronic fatigue,
or at least there's a massive overlap.
One of the
I'm sure there's some
worst
well-rested
side
depressed people out
effects
there.
of long-term chronic fatigue that goes untreated is suicide.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it at all.
Yeah.
Because the people just can't exist anymore.
I have a friend who has chronic. Well, he's not a friend. He's my friend's older brother, but he has chronic fatigue, and he's definitely. He likes to put it. He retired at 23. I think he's like 30 now, but he just lives with his parents, and he can't do really much. Like he does enough to get him through the day and keep things interesting. Like he helps his dad with his business a bit, and he works on computers, but he's not able to just hold anything solid because it's kind of rough. Yeah, I'm gonna stop now. So, unless you guys got something.
Oh, I got
Okay.
one thing while we're on the topic. I can't sleep on airplanes, and I don't know if anybody else has this, but when you guys drift off in airplanes, do you just get this like huge, like maybe like 2.5 seconds of just complete temporary deafness, and then you get alerted back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to know if I was
like
the only one.
it's sort of like your
you
consciousness.
hear the
just,
background noise completely shuts off, and then you're like,
it just like gives
Yeah.
up. You're like, your brain just gives up processing all the
Yeah.
noise.
You know, well, I find it gives up processing noise, and it's like, oh, I was only asleep for a few seconds, and that's actually about 30 minutes later.
okay, yeah, I actually am only asleep for a few seconds.
Yeah, no.
Or whatever. Like I don't know. I can't like hold that and keep sleeping. I
I've
gotta
never
really
slept
wake
on an
up.
airplane. However,
Yeah, me neither.
there is a photo of me sleeping on an airplane, so I am conflicted on this.
Yeah,
opinion.
my parents, because I went to New Zealand when I was younger, and my mom was telling me about how she would like desperately try to get me to sleep, and I would just like go for a few seconds and then immediately wake up and think that I had slept.
So when I went to Japan, we got off the plane, there's the group of people, and we all got on a bus from the Tokyo airport to go to where we're going, and it's like a several hour drive. And during that drive, I sat down and immediately fell asleep. Then I woke up, Then throughout the rest of the trip, everyone's complaining about jet lag and like fatigue and stuff. I'm fine. I feel great. It's because falling asleep on the bus basically perfectly lined me up. So I woke up and I was awake for like another 8 hours. Then I went to sleep again at night, and I was just like perfect.
That's in the Dream Merchant. That's the kid's power. He has the power to fall asleep instantly.
Yeah, I know some people who are kind of like that, especially when they get drunk, who will just like conk out in any position and anywhere, and I wish I had that talent.
Yeah,
that's one of Odin's powers.
anytime I close my eyes, I'm still like conscious for a good half an hour.
If I'm in bed, I can be up for hours just lying on my back, just like.
Mr. Wednesday's 2 powers in American Gods is he can fall asleep whenever he wants to, and he usually gets what he wants.
Yeah, that's very similar actually to the Dream Merchant guy because he's a thief. Yeah, I think maybe American Gods stole it from Dream Merchant. Dream Merchant's older.
Yeah, take that, Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
We're on to you, buddy.
I don't like him. I mean, I don't have anything against him as a person. I don't like his books. Except I do like The Dream Merchant. I do like American Gods.
I haven't read American Gods.
And I also like Neverwhere.
So maybe you do like him.
And I like Good Omens. But
I like Good Omens besides the bits that Neil Gaiman wrote.
There's something sick about him. He's like...
I think he's said in interviews that he was really like... When he wrote American Gods, he was in a really dark place. And the TV show that they did was like a lot less of that.
It's more... You know those kind of people that spend all their time in coffee shops talking about their book they're working on their Apple computer, and the sort of hipster artist vibe, maybe?
Theoretically, I'd have to be in a coffee shop.
Like if you go to like the art student building at your university, I think there's a lot of people like that there.
As if.
Yeah, okay, so those kind of people you're avoiding. He's very much like that.
Yeah.
And there's a certain sickness underlying all that, like a sort of saccharine...
ego, I want to be the best.
Not ego, it's like I don't think he's very egotistical. It's more of a their view of the world is completely warped. Like they think that they're arrogant about their existentialism
philosophy or whatever.
Yeah, like so Kurtzler Gazette released a video recently about climate change and how they said we're going to solve climate change. And it's full of a bunch of stuff like solar power is doubled in efficiency and halved in price every 2 years, and since like the 90s, wind power is super cheap. We have things that can scrub CO2 from the atmosphere. We've all sorts of stuff that I knew about, and
when it gets to be a huge problem, somebody will.
Well, the thing is, people have already been working on it this whole time.
Yeah.
And I knew that because I've been in an environment and doing environmental stuff for my entire life, basically. But the part that got me about the video was the comments, because the comments were full of nihilists, essentially, who had been cured by this video because they're saying, oh, wait, everything's not doomed. I thought it was all doomed. It's such an important video. This changed my life. Like, huge amount. And to have the most... Like, nihilism, I would say, has to be the most defining characteristic of your body. Because if you think meaningless is pointless, that is your most defining characteristic. Like, not as in... Like, I think existentialism, to a degree, you can say there is no point. You make it up yourself. I wouldn't characterize that as nihilism. I'd say nihilism is like a despair about the state of nothingness. And I think that has to be your most important attribute about you, because if you despair about the state of nothingness, I mean, nothing else matters, I think.
I think one of the things I've noticed a lot as, like, I would describe myself as a fairly happy guy, I think most people would, is that no person who's genuinely happy thinks that nihilists are fools for believing what they believe, but every nihilist believes a genuinely happy person is a fool for believing what they believe, right?
But the thing that gets me, maybe I do think a nihilist is a fool, because in order to have the nihilism...
I think nihilists are fools, but I believe they're fools because they think I'm a fool.
But in order to have the pessimism the nihilist had, they had to be ignorant about something. Like, they were so arrogant, they believed they knew everything.
They would argue that you're happy because you're ignorant of all the bad things in life.
Right, but I can say I know about all the bad things, but I don't know everything. So, like, let's say everything.
Well, no one can never know everything.
Yeah, which means there might be a meaning to everything. There might be, you die and God shakes your hand. He's like, "Good job out there."
Completely arbitrary.
50 points.
Yeah, he like slaps you on the butt and says, "Next round, go for double." I don't know.
I think nihilism is stupid. I think existentialism makes a bit more sense.
I think I think nihilism is incredibly arrogant, actually, because you're saying I know everything. Because in order to despair about everything, you have to say I know that there is nothing beyond.
In order to despair about the entire lack of meaning.
Yeah, you have to say I know there is no meaning.
Yeah. Absurdism an improvement from nihilism?
Well, I think that's similar to existentialism in a way. I mean, define absurdism first.
The Joker.
But, like that's more what Dataism is that called?
I don't think you can take one character from a TV show and say that's an entire philosophy.
Oh, it is.
Especially when he's got.
Well, no, the idea of
million
Joker is that
adaptations.
you can do anything. So it's radical freedom to a degree.
Yeah.
But which is Sartre, who I also kind of hate. But the reason I don't like Sartre is not because of his writing exactly, because he's written a lot of good stuff. It's because he's like a simp for Simone Bolivar, and it's pathetic, and she's an awful person. Is I don't know. I think she's still alive.
No, she's dead.
Is she?
Yeah.
Okay.
We took her down.
And okay, maybe she's not an awful person. I don't like any of her writing. She's probably a fine person. I mean, obviously Sartre liked her, but everything I've read by her I've found very, very bad. She yeah. I'd have to do a podcast on her sometime, maybe. But then I have to read her. Maybe then I would like her, because I'd be like, oh, actually, you know what? I'm
That's like reading Ayn Rand. This here, fill-in origin stories. You actually read an Ayn Rand book.
Well, that's the thing about a lot of philosophies is you read them and you're like, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought. Like, that's basically true of everything but
Ayn Rand's
communism.
Philosophy
Communism gets worse.
Ayn Rand's philosophy isn't terrible. Her writing is. She's a bad writer.
Well, communism gets worse, but you realize that Marx made a lot of valid criticisms.
Yeah.
His solutions are worse than you thought they were, but Marx's criticisms, you're like, wow, these are very solid criticisms.
Ayn Rand's books is full of Mary Sue's, and it's a self-insert for her wanting to be loved by anti-communist men, and there's like 3 amazing men who all love her self-insert train conductor character.
All right, well, let's stop there. Yeah. All right.